and that's why it should not be opposed, should not be argued against it. That is not like that. They argued that, fine, we would definitely welcome the foreign aid from United States also, that we have been taking from since 1950s, early 1950s. US is one of the largest development financer of Nepal in the earlier days also. But the point is that in the name of development financing, the country like Nepal should not lose its sovereign independence, should not go against the constitutional spirit mandated by our constitution while agreeing any kinds of the support. And the most fundamentally should not fall in a trap of the big power squabbles or the conflicts. We should maintain our non-aligned foreign policy in terms of the military alliances. Whether this agreement would provide a level playing field or would provide a routes for the military presence or the military intervention, or sometimes some sort of the interventions on the government or political parties and the governance system, so that we may fall in a trap of big country rivals or conflicts. That is what the people who were arguing against the MCC, the conditionalities, they were talking about the terms and conditions of the agreements, provisions of the agreements, principles of the MCCs, whether that fit according to our Nepal's interest and need or not. And the more fundamentally, the supranational provisions, beyond the national sovereignty, the right of the independent government has already been infringed. That is what the people talking against MCC. Those people who were talking for MCC say that, oh, this is a grant, should not protest against grant. This is not loan. And then US is our great alliance, friend. We should not mistrust them. And then we should accept. This will be useful and beneficial for Nepal, and we should take grants from this source or that source. And then the argument is, the against argument is sometimes against United States. That is what the debate was going on. Anyway, the project has already been ratified by the Parliament with certain points, 12-point remarks, and then the debate will continue to go, because there is, Dr. Rawal mentioned that the certain provisions, although this is a project for 5 years, but the certain provisions are perpetual, will have the implications after completion of the project also, for indefinite period. This is the only project in the Nepalese history which has such kinds of the provision that goes perpetually. And the Nepal is obliged to follow perpetually for indefinite period. And then this is the only project that Nepal has lost every control over the execution of the development aid project, this development financing. This is what the debate is going on. No? On this background, rather than speaking me much more, I would like to first invite the eminent speaker, today's speaker, Dr. Khagendra Persai. I don't maybe not need to introduce almost all of you to Persai. He has been together with us from the first series of Kasthamandap Dialogue, and then also one of the architects of this second series dialogue, this Kasthamandap Dialogue. And he is associate professor and dean in Nepal University. And he has a master's and PhD degree in philosophy from United States, and another master's degree from Tribhuvan University. That's why he's a double master's degree and a PhD in philosophy and anthropology and sociology. And he has been constantly writing on different topics, including the Nepal's some critical international issues like BRI and MCC and some other foreign relations. And then he is one of the most studious left intellectual as well. With this, I would like to welcome. We are very eager to listen you, Dr. Prasai, your perspectives on the today's topics. As usual this morning, you have chaired the session already. I don't need to mention about time. That is 15 minutes. Time is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Leelaji. Chair, organizer, chair of this session, and co-panelist, and everybody. Thank you for the generous introductions. I am sure I do not deserve that much. I am a learner, and then a learner who intends to share things that he has learned. So I thought later on, it is advisable or prudent for me to speak in Nepali today. There are certainly some reasons which I am not going to share, but if the chair permits me to speak in Nepali, I go ahead. Thank you. अब मैले चाहिँ यो MCC को बारेमा म MCC विरोधीको रूपमा उपस्थित भएँ नेपाली मिडियाहरुमा लेखनमा। त्यसपछि म स्वतः बायस भएँ होला भन्ने तपाईहरुलाई आग्रह लाग्न सक्छ। तर म दर्शन शास्त्रमा बढी अध्ययन गर्ने भएकोले दर्शन भनेको देख्नु भनेको तथ्यलाई देख्नु हो। अतथ्यलाई देख्नु भनिदैन, अन्धविश्वास भनिन्छ। जो दुनियाँमा छैन त्यो छ भन्नु चाहिँ अन्धविश्वास भयो। देख्नु दर्शन भनेको चाहिँ जो छ त्यो देख्न खोज्नु। त्यसैले मैले तथ्यका आधारमै मैले पक्षधरता लिएको हुँ। तथ्यका आधार बिना लिएको पक्षधरताको मिनिङ पनि हुँदैन। र म फेरि यसरी बुझ्दिनँ कि हामी यो सर्कलभित्र वाम सर्कलभित्रै अथवा डिबेट रुचाउने सर्कलभित्रै पनि यो विषयलाई खुला बहस गरौँ भन्ने हाम्रो आग्रह पनि हो। र म MCC का थुप्रै कुरालाई आज इग्नोर गर्छु। भीम रावलजीले थुप्रो कुरा जोरदार रूपले उहिले पनि उठाउनु भएको छ। हामीसँगै आन्दोलनमा हुँदा अहिले पनि उठाउनु भन्छ। अब युवराज सरका अगाडि संविधान र कानुनको कुरा मैले यहाँ उठाउनु भनेको आमाका अगाडि मामाको बयान गरे जस्तो हुन्छ। अरू साथीहरू छन् जसले अनेक विषयमा विभिन्न विषयमा कसैले कपिराइट हेर्नुहुन्छ, अमृतजीले इन्टरनेसनल लसँग बढी जोड्नुहुन्छ। म त्यो सबैलाई एकछिन सस्पेन्ड गर्छु, निलम्बन गर्छु र म एउटा कुरा फोकस गर्छु जो मलाई के लाग्छ भने अत्यन्तै महत्त्वपूर्ण र सार्वधिक महत्त्वपूर्ण विषय हो। मलाई लाग्छ यदि यो विषय साँच्चै सिरियस अगाडि बढ्यो भने ती अरू विषय चाहिँ गौण हुन्छन् कि जस्तोसम्म पनि त्यसो भइदिए त झनै राम्रो हुन्थ्यो। मैले उठाउन खोजेको विषयमा म प्रवेश गर्छु। एउटा मात्रै विषयमा म प्रवेश गर्छु किनभने मेरो बीचको 4-5 वर्षको अध्ययन चाहिँ यो विषयमा बढी भएको छ। त्योभन्दा अगाडि म धेरै अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय सम्बन्धमा खासै कलम पनि चलाउँदैन थिएँ, बोल्दैन पनि थिएँ, पढ्दैन पनि थिएँ, लेख्दैन पनि थिएँ। मार्क्सवाद बुझेपछि त दुनियाँमा अरू विषय बुझ्नै पर्दैन भन्ने दम्ब थियो, भ्रम पनि थियो होला होइन। के त द्वन्द्वात्मक भौतिकवाद बुझेपछि अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय सम्बन्धको बात गरेपछि भन्ने जस्तो टाइपको कुरा आउँथ्यो। अब मैले उठाउन खोजेको कुरा पहिला म संविधानबाट सुरु गर्छु। हाम्रो संविधानले हाम्रो अन्तर्राष्ट्रिय सम्बन्ध इन्डिपेन्डेन्ट नर्म्स अफ पिसबाट, राष्ट्रिय स्वार्थबाट, नन एलाइनमेन्टबाट, UN चार्टरबाट निर्दिष्ट हुनुपर्छ भन्ने कुरा गर्यो। तर म संविधानमा प्रवेश धेरै गर्दिनँ। अघि मैले भने युवराज सर हुँदाहुँदै मैले त्यो विषय छुनु भनेको त्यति राम्रो कुरा होइन। अब म कहाँबाट कुरा गर्छु भने आजको MCCलाई, हिजोको MCC, आजको MCC र MCC प्रकृति भएका भोलि भविष्यमा आउने तमाम परियोजनाहरूको कुरामा उठाउँदैछु। आज MCC को कुरा मात्रै उठाउँदिनँ मैले। ती तमाम परियोजनाहरूको कुरा हामीले कसरी बुझ्ने भन्दा यही मार्क्सवादी दृष्टिकोणबाट, ऐतिहासिक भौतिकवादी दृष्टिकोणबाट मलाई फेरि दृष्टिकोण बिना दुनियाँ बुझ्ने कुरै केही लाग्दैन। त्यो सिसाको ग्लासको पनि दृष्टिकोण हुन्छ कि लेन्सको। छोटो बनाएर हेर्ने कि सानो बनाएर हेर्ने कि चकिलो बनाएर हेर्ने, उसले पनि आफ्नो दृष्टिकोण, निर्जीव चिजको पनि दृष्टिकोण हुने भएपछि हामी मनुष्यको दृष्टिकोण नहुने कुरै भएन। मैले भन्न खोजेको चाहिँ त्यही ऐतिहासिक भौतिकवादी दृष्टिकोणबाट विश्लेषण गर्दा आजको दुनियाँ पुँजीवादी दुनियाँ हो र यो पुँजीवादी दुनियाँको जसरी विकसित हुँदैछ त्यो विकसित हुने प्रक्रियामा एमसिसी जस्ता परियोजना, जस्ता पनि भने है मैले, एमसिसी लगायत एमसिसी जस्ता तमाम भविष्यका आजका परियोजनाहरूलाई कसरी बुझ्नुपर्छ, कसरी लिनुपर्छ भन्ने कुरा चाहिँ हामीले अध्ययनको विषय बनाउनुपर्छ भन्छु। र मेरो आज मैले निर्क्युल गरेर दाबी गरेर तपाईँहरूसँग जान्न, यो तरिकाले अध्ययन गरौँ कि भन्ने आग्रह मात्रै राखेर जान्छु। त्यसो गर्दा अनि झन् बढी म मार्क्सवादी हुने राम्रो चान्स मिल्छ मलाई, किन खुल्ला राख्नु पऱ्यो, विज्ञानवादी हुने भनौँ न एकछिन। अब यो अहिलेको विश्व व्यवस्था पुँजीवादी हो, तर अहिलेको विश्व व्यवस्था एउटा ध्रुवको पुँजीवादले संसारमा डिक्टेटरसिप लागेर दुनियाँ आफ्नै हातमा चलाएको व्यवस्था होइन, जो 1990 को फुल दशकभित्र थियो। सोभियत युनियनको कोल्याप्स पछाडि 1990 भरि सामान्यतया अमेरिका भनेको ईश्वर जस्तै बनाएको थियो। अमेरिका, न्याटो, अमेरिकी एलायन्सहरू पुँजीवादी एलायन्सहरू। तर अहिलेको व्यवस्था के भयो भने यो मल्टिपोलारिटीतर्फ उन्मुख भएको व्यवस्था। मल्टिपोलारिटीतर्फ उन्मुख भयो भने पुँजीवाद चाहिँ पुँजीवादी विश्व व्यवस्थै हो, तर मल्टिपोलारिटी भन्दा पुँजीवादको अब एउटा मात्रै केन्द्र, निर्णायक केन्द्र छैनन्। पुँजीवादी व्यवस्थाभित्र थुप्रो बहुकेन्द्रहरू निर्माण हुँदैछन्, लगातार हुने प्रक्रियामा छ। त्यो बहुकेन्द्र निर्माण हुने प्रक्रिया र खास गरेर चाइनाको उदय अझ बढी यसमा, जस्तो भारतको उदय अमेरिकनहरूलाई अहिले धेरै चाहिँ काउछाको विषय बनाएको छ। तपाईँले भर्खरै पनि भारतसँग नै अमेरिकाको पङ्गेबाजी सुरु भएको छ। त्यो पङ्गेबाजीले भारत र चाइनालाई नजिक ल्याउँदैछ। त्यसका हामीलाई फाइदा बेफाइदा पनि छन्। लिपुलेखको दुर्घटना सुरु भइसकेको छ, अब फाइदा हुने ठाउँहरू पनि थुप्रो छन् फेरि, होइन? तर त्यो पाटो एउटा भयो भनेपछि चाइनाको एकदमै असाधारण उदयका कारणले एउटा सिचुएसन बन्दो रहेछ। यो मानव जातिकामा जब राज्यहरू बने, ती राज्यहरू बन्दादेखि नै यो सार्वभौम रूपले लागू भएको नियम रहेछ क्या। एकजनाले यसको थरो अध्ययन गरेका छन्, थुसिडी ट्र्याप भन्ने गरिन्छ यसलाई। उदयमान राष्ट्रले आफ्नो उदयमानतालाई निरन्तर कायम राख्ने प्रयत्न गर्छ, अनि गिर्दै गरेको राष्ट्रले आफ्नो गिर्दै गरेको अवस्थालाई गिर्न नदिने प्रयत्न गर्छ। अहिले उदयमान राष्ट्र चीन र अरूहरू भए, अब भियतनाम पनि उदयमान भयो, तर सामरिक हिसाबले त्यत्रो बलियो नभएकोले त्यो गणनामा आएन। उदयमान राष्ट्रहरू, चीन जस्ता उदयमान राष्ट्रहरू उदाइरहने खोज्ने भए, अनि अमेरिकाले आफ्नो गिर्दो अवस्था, अमेरिका र सिङ्गो युरोपको गिर्दो अवस्था चाहिँ बचाइराख्नु पर्ने भएपछि अब युद्ध चाहिँ असम्भव, के अरे यो इनेभिटेबल हुन्छ, अवश्यम्भावी हुन्छ, पक्का हुन्छ भन्ने एउटा थेसिसलाई थुसिडी ट्र्याप भनिन्छ। हुन्छ अब युद्धले बचाउन सक्छ कि सक्दैन? किताबै छ कि, डेस्टिन फर वार भन्ने एउटा किताब नै छ, अमेरिकी सरकारका विज्ञले लेखेको किताब। अनि यो कुरा गर्दै गएपछि के हुन्छ भने अब अमेरिकनहरूले आफूलाई बचाइरहनु पर्यो, आफ्नो हेजेमनी, चाइनाले आफ्नो ऋणनीतिक विकासलाई पनि अगाडि लानु पर्यो। त्यो भएपछि एउटा द्वन्द्वको स्थिति सिर्जना भएको छ। अहिलेको मल्टिपोलर वर्ल्डमा द्वन्द्वको स्थिति सिर्जना भएको छ, र ट्रम्पको पहिलो कार्यकालमा त्यो द्वन्द्वको अवस्था अत्यन्तै बढी खुल्लमखुल्ला मुखरित भएर आएको थियो। ओबामा कार्यकालमा त्यो द्वन्द्वको अवस्थालाई उनीहरूले इन्गेजमेन्ट भन्थे। उनीहरूलाई कहिले के लागेन भने चाइनालाई हामीले यसो व्यापार गरेपछि यस्तै हो, त्यहाँको कम्युनिजम सिद्धिन्छ, त्यहाँ हामी जस्तै पुँजीवादको माग हुन्छ, त्यसपछि चाइना हाम्रै सेटेलाइट स्टेट हुन्छ भन्ने उनीहरूको हिसाब किताब। तर त्यस्तो भएन। नभएपछि यसले के निकाल्यो भने द्वन्द्वको अवस्था सृजना गरौँ। हो, यो द्वन्द्वको अवस्थामा एमसिसी भन्ने चिजलाई, अब यो द्वन्द्व अमेरिका र चाइनाको द्वन्द्वमा नेपाल भन्ने राष्ट्र चाहिँ अमेरिकनहरूको लागि स्ट्राटेजिकली चाहिँ रणनैतिक हिसाबले महत्त्वपूर्ण हुने भयो। यो महत्त्वपूर्ण भएपछि नेपाल राज्यमा आफ्नो यो ग्रिप के भन्छ त्यसलाई, कस्ने, जुन यो कस्ने कुरा उनीहरूलाई बढाउनु जरुरी हुने भयो, र उनीहरूले यस्तै अनुसार खुल्लमखुल्ला आफ्ना डिफेन्स वेबसाइटमा अनि त्यस पछाडि सेक्युरिटी मिनिस्ट्रीका वेबसाइटमा यो कुरा लेखेर राखेका छन् कि अमेरिकाले आफ्नो ग्लोबल हेजेमनीलाई विस्तार गरिरहनुपर्छ। सुन्नुहोस् है, यो मैले बनाएको होइन यो। अब यो कुरै नबुझी हामी एमसिसीको डिबेटमा गयौँ भने हामी त्यही एमसिसीको कपिराइट बाबर कति पैसा गुमाउँछौँ भन्नेमा मात्रै सीमित हुन्छ। फेरि त्यो पनि विषय हो, तर त्यो विषय समात्ने र यो विषय छोड्ने भयो भने चाहिँ काम बिग्रिने भएको हुनाले मैले यो विषय अलिक जोड दिएको। अब यो मैले बनाएको कुरा होइन। म मार्क्सवादी भएको हुनाले, ऐतिहासिक भौतिकवादी भएको हुनाले अमेरिकी पुँजीवादी देशको आलोचना गरेर भनेको होइन। यो उनीहरूका वेबसाइटमा लेखिएको कुरा के हो भने अमेरिकाले आफ्नो ग्लोबल हेजेमोनीलाई कायम राख्नुपर्छ, चाइना भन्ने एउटा देशले त्यो रिजनमा आफ्नो हेजेमोनी बनाउन खोज्दैछ, लिडरसिप स्थापित गर्न खोज्दैछ सामरिक र आर्थिक, त्यसलाई रोक्नको लागि हामीलाई एउटा इन्डो पेसिफिक भन्ने स्ट्र्याटेजी चाहिन्छ र त्यसमा हामीले भारत जस्ता अलरेडी उनीहरूसँग एलाइड छँदैछन्, साउथ कोरिया, जापान यस्ता एलाइजहरू छँदैछन्। अब पार्टनरहरू पनि चाहिन्छ, त्यो पार्टनरहरू अथवा फिलिपिन्स पार्टनरहरू चाहिन्छ, त्यो पार्टनरहरू चाहिँ हामीले प्राप्त गर्नुपर्छ र त्यो पार्टनरमा चाहिँ हामीले त्यो पार्टनर प्राप्त गर्ने भनेको एउटा नेपाल पनि हो र नेपाल स्ट्र्याटेजिक हिसाबले साह्रै महत्त्वपूर्ण ठाउँ हो भन्ने उनीहरूको निर्क्युल पछाडि इन्डो पेसिफिक स्ट्र्याटेजी आयो र इन्डो पेसिफिक स्ट्र्याटेजी आइसकेपछि त्यसलाई पुस गर्न कसैले पछाडि आएकोमा अगाडि कसरी हुन्छ भन्छन्। 22 सालमा खोलेको स्कुल 29 सालमा खोलेको स्कुलमा गाभिँदैन र? योभन्दा अगाडि बनेका कानुनहरू संविधान अन्तर्गत गाभिया छैनन् र? कस्तो उटपट्याङ तर्क गर्छन् भने यो बुर्जुवाहरू तर्कै भन्नु उटपट्याङ कुतर्क गर्छन् भन्दा अलि राम्रो हुन्छ होला। र अमेरिकाको फोरेन पोलिसीमा चाइना भन्ने देशलाई खुल्लमखुल्ला शत्रुको क्याटेगोरीमा राखिएको छ, जो युनाइटेड नेसनको चार्टरले पर्मिट गर्दैन। देशहरू शत्रुतापूर्ण सम्बन्धमा प्रवेश गर्नु हुँदैन भन्ने युनाइटेड नेसनको चार्टर हो। त्यसले त देशहरू शत्रुतापूर्ण उसमा प्रवेश गर्छन् भन्ने त कल्पनै गर्दैन। गरे भने सेक्युरिटी काउन्सिल मार्फत त्यो शत्रुतालाई मिनिमाइज गर्नुपर्छ भन्ने ठाउँमा पुग्ने हो। युद्ध हुन नदिनुपर्छ। 5वटा देश तयार भएपछि मात्र युद्ध गर्ने भनेको त त्यही त हो, युद्धको सम्भावनालाई रोक्ने भनेको। यो भइसकेपछि अब हेर्नु है, चाइनालाई शत्रु घोषणा गरियो, रसियालाई शत्रु घोषणा गरेको 4टा देश छन्। इरानलाई अहिले इरानमाथि भएको बम्बार्डमेन्ट त्यो न्युक्लियर साइटमा हानिएको भन्छ नि बमदेखि यो सारा कुरा यसको यो हामी यसै सोचिरहेको छैनौँ कि नेपालमा भोलि सैनिक हिसाबले युद्ध हुन्छ भन्ने कुरा हाम्रो नेपालीहरूको धेरै दिमागमा छैन। इरानले कुन स्थिति फेस गर्नु पर्यो, युक्रेनले कुन स्थितिबाट गुज्रिनु पर्यो भन्ने कुरा अध्ययन गरे पुग्छ। यो हाम्रो चेतनामै घुसेको छैन के। हामी भोलि युद्धको मैदान हुन्छौँ भन्ने चेतनामा घुस्नु आवश्यक छ भन्ने लाग्छ मलाई। यो खतरा। अनि चाइनालाई चाहिँ यो मुख्य शत्रु मानेर, रसियालाई मुख्य शत्रु, 4वटा देशलाई, कोरियालाई मुख्य शत्रु मानेर चाहिँ पोलिसीलाई अगाडि बढाउने र त्यसलाई ठिक गर्नको लागि भारत लगायतका देशहरूको गठबन्धन बनाउने हो इन्डो पेसिफिक भने। त्यहाँको वेबसाइटमा गएर हेर्नु भने नेपालका कुनै मन्त्रीले हाँस्दै हात मिलाएर त्यो इन्डो पेसिफिकको सदस्यता लिए जस्तो गरेर फोटो खिच्नु भएको छ है। त्यसो गरेर पछि हामीले के भन्न सक्छौँ अब भने, अब चाइनालाई चाहिँ रिभिजनिस्ट स्टेट भनियो र यो एरियामा उसले चाहिँ सन्तुलनै बिगार्छ। सन्तुलन बिगार्नु भनेको अमेरिकाको वर्चस्वलाई बिगारिदिन्छ, भत्ताभङ्ग बनाइदिन्छ भने चाहिँ चाइना शत्रु हो। त्यसैले उसलाई रिभिजनिस्ट स्टेट भन्यो। रिभिजनिस्ट स्टेट भनेको युनिपोलर वर्ल्ड अर्डर थियो नि नवउदारवादको, त्यसले रिभिजन गरिदिने भयो नि त। अब एक छत्र मेरो शासनलाई उसले चुनौती दिने भयो भनेपछि यो अर्थमा आयो। तपाईँले G7 का नेटोका समिटहरूका डकुमेन्ट हेर्नु भने त्यहाँको प्रिन्सिपल एजेन्डा नै चाइनालाई गाली गर्ने छ। चाइना मुर्दाबाद भन्ने बाहेक तपाईँले ती डकुमेन्टहरूमा भेट्नुहुन्न। र त्यहाँका तमाम मिडियादेखि अहिले चाहिँ अलिअलि डिभाइडेड छ। तमाम मिडियाहरू चाइनालाई दुश्मनको रूपमा, चाइनालाई पापीको रूपमा, चाइनालाई जिनोसाइडल स्टेटको रूपमा पोर्ट्रे गर्छन् एभ्रिडे, बिहानदेखि बेलुकासम्म। यो सिचुएसनमा चाइनाको तपाईँले हेर्नुभयो भने विभिन्न 5, 7, 10वटा डकुमेन्ट हेरेको मैले। ती सबै डकुमेन्टहरूमा के लेखिएको छ भने प्रष्टसँग MCC इन्डो पेसिफिकको पार्ट हो भनेर लेखिएको छ। मैले भने होइन। अब नेपालका धेरै मान्छेहरूलाई त्यो पनि होइन जस्तो लाग्छ। त्यो त होइन होला भने जस्तो तर्क चाहिँ गर्नु हुँदैन। त्यो त्यहाँ लेखिएको छ, त्यहाँ खोलेर हेर्दा देखिन्छ। त्यस कारणले पनि MCC पास गर्ने कुरा नेपालको भन्दा बढी अमेरिकनको चासो भएको हामीलाई थाहा छैन र? जति बेला शेरबहादेवको प्रधानमन्त्रीत्व मन्त्रीमण्डल बनेको थियो, आजै MCC पास, आजै अमेरिकाको मान्छे आएको छ, आजै भोलिपल्टै अमेरिकाको मान्छे आएको छ, डेपुटी स्टेट सेक्रेटरी आएको छ, अर्को आएको छ गरेर भनेको त उसको आवश्यकता बढी हो रहेछ नि त त्यो हाम्रो आवश्यकता भन्दा। किनभने यो कारणले हो, नेपाललाई आफ्नो ग्रिपमा लियो भने चाइना विरुद्धको अभियान के हुन्छ, सफल हुन्छ। त्यो अब चाइना जस्तो इमर्जिङ पावरले सुतेको के भन्छ त्यसलाई, सुतेको ड्रागनले, सुतेको साम्राज्यले हाम्रो भाषामा होइन, हिजो त साम्राज्य हो चाइना, सुतेको साम्राज्यले पनि चुप्पा लाएर बस्दैन। त्यो त उठेर अहिले त दौडिसकेको छ, अमेरिकाभन्दा छिटो दौडिने हाइपरसोनिक बनाइसकेको छ उसले होइन। अस्ति हवाईमा चाहिँ अझै साउथ चाइना मर्निङ पोस्टमा पढ्दै थिएँ, त्यहाँको जङ्गलबाट हवाईमा चाहिँ ठ्याक्राक्कै ल्यान्ड गर्ने इन्टरकन्टिनेन्टल बलिस्टिक मिसाइल चाइनिसँग छ। अब त्यो त चुप्पा लाएर बस्दैन। अनि त्यो यहाँ आएर चाइना विरुद्ध अभियान चलाउने, हाम्रा विरुद्ध होइन है, चाइना विरुद्ध। फेरि अमेरिकन हाम्रा विरुद्ध छैनन् नि, फेरि चाइना विरोधी छन् अहिलेलाई। अनि चाइना त्यसलाई काउन्टर गर्छ नि चाइनाले, होइन र? इरान जस्तो देशले त गरिदियो। तपाईँले के ठान्नु भएको थियो र इरानलाई कति शक्ति छ भने ठानेको त अमेरिकाको मिलिटरी बेसमा बम्बार्डमेन्ट गरेन र इरानले अस्ति, फोरेन मिलिटरी बेसमा, होइन? भने संसार त हिजो भने जस्तो छैन त। उत्तर कोरियालाई किन चुनाउँदैले सक्दैनन्? दिनै पछि सरापे पनि भने उत्तर कोरियासँग न्युक्लियर बम छ, होइन? त्यस कारणले चाइनिजहरूले जुन आफ्नो मिलिटरी बिल्डअप गरेको छ 1990 भन्दा हिजो अमेरिका र चाइनाको बिचमा जुन मिलिटरी ग्याप थियो 90मा, आज त्यो ग्यापै छैन। तपाईँले ग्लोबल फायर पावर इन्डेक्समा गएर हेर्नु भने सानो ग्याप छ अब चाइना र अमेरिका। यद्यपि अमेरिका बढी पावरफुल छ, एयरफोर्समा बढिरहेछ, अरू कुरामा चाइनिजहरू अगाडि गइसकेको छ। अनि चाइना त चुप लाएर बस्दैन। अब त्यस पछाडि हुने के? नेपाल के हुने भयो? अब युक्रेनीकरण हुने भयो। युक्रेनको ठ्याक्कै यही होइन घटना। नेटोको निरन्तर एक्सपान्सन नगर भनिरहेछ रसियाले, उनीहरू लगातार गरेपछि त्यो ठाउँमा पुगेपछि युद्धको स्थिति बनेको। आज नेटो त युक्रेन त नष्ट भइसकेको छ, भित्रपट्टि जवान मान्छेहरूकै ठुलो सङ्ख्या मरिसकेको छ, होइन? यो सन्दर्भमा चाहिँ एमसिसी र अरू परियोजनालाई बुझ्नुपर्छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। तर यो विषय डिबेट अलिक कम भएको हो कि भनेर चाहिँ मैले गर्छु। अब यहाँनिर अर्को एउटा महत्त्वपूर्ण कुरा छ, मलाई सम्झाउनु होला समयको बारेमा। फेरि म यो समय मिच्नु चाहिँ पुँजीवादी चरित्र हो भन्ने ठान्दछु क्या। अघि युवराज सरले 3 मिनट पुँजीवाद देखाउनु भएको छ क्या, मिचेर 2 मिनटमा। 2 मिनट होइन, अलि 1 मिनट बढिदिनु है ल। एउटा म अर्को, अब यो कन्टेक्स्ट है, यो कन्टेक्स्टमा अध्ययन गरौँ है साथीहरू। अब यस पछाडि के हुन्छ भन्दा, अब यस्तो कुरा त हामीले सन्धिमा लेखा छैन नि त भन्ने तर्क साथीहरू, ठिक छ, यो तर्कलाई खुला सुन्नुपर्छ। यो तर्कलाई पहिले रिडिक्युल गरेर हँसी मजाकमा गर्दिनँ। तर साथीहरू हेरौँ त 5 नम्बर बुँदामा के लेखा छ, क्लज 5मा के प्रश्न लेखिएको छ भने नेपालले थुप्रै शर्तहरू मान्नुपर्छ। त्यो मानिन्छ, ठिक छ, मान्ने भयो। तर एउटा खतरनाक शर्त छ, अब नेपालले अमेरिकी सुरक्षा चासोलाई सम्बोधन गर्नुपर्छ र कुनै अमेरिकी सुरक्षा चासोमा प्रतिकूल हुने केही गर्न पाइँदैन भनेको छ। त्यो सामान्यतया सबै परियोजनामा हुन्छ, सो फार सो गुड। तर खतरनाक कुरा के छ भने अब हाम्रो छिमेकीलाई शत्रु मानेर उनीहरूको सुरक्षा रणनीति बनेको छ, अनि त्यो सुरक्षा रणनीतिलाई हामीले एड्रेस गर्नु परेपछि अब हाम्रो हालत के हुन्छ? हामीले चीनलाई शत्रु मान्नु पर्दैन? अब सो त भोलि हामीले चीनसँग ठुलो 8 लेनको बाटो बनायौँ हिमाल पहाड छेडेर भने, उसले छिरेर भने, उसले के भन्छ भने, छेडेर भने उसले के भन्छ भने, होइन यो परियोजनालाई त मेरो सेक्युरिटी थ्रेट गर, बन्द गर भनेपछि बन्द गर्नुपर्छ। सिधा कुरा छ है, यसमा अल्मलिनु पर्ने कुरै छैन। भनेको सामान्य अवस्थामा अमेरिकाको सुरक्षा चासोलाई सम्बोधन नेपालले गर्ने कुरा ठिकठाक हो। तर हाम्रै छिमेकीलाई शत्रु घोषणा गरेर बनाइएको सुरक्षा रणनीति अन्तर्गतको सुरक्षा चासो सम्बोधन गर्नु भनेको कति खतरनाक कुरा होला? अब गर्न सकिएला यो कुरा? यो कुरा चाहिँ सबभन्दा खतरनाक कुरा भएर आउने भयो। त्यसैले के हुन्छ अब भने, अनि चाइनालाई त्यो हराउनका लागि उसले इन्डो पेसिफिक बनाउँदैछ, उहाँबाट दौडेर यो एरियामा आउँदैछ, अमेरिकाको सेनाको मिलिटरी बिल्डअप बन्दैछ इन्डो पेसिफिकमा इन्डियालाई साथ लिएर बनेपछि त त्यो झन् खतरनाक हुने भयो। इन्डिया बाहिर भागो भने हाम्रो लागि अलि अनुकूल हुने होला, इन्डिया पनि त्यहाँ मिसिएपछि झन् हामीलाई खतरा हुन्छ, चीनका लागि पनि त्यो अलि थ्रेट हुन्छ। अनि यो अवस्थाको सुरक्षा चासो सम्बोधन गर्ने कुरा कति खतरनाक छ, यो कुरा इग्नोर गर्नु हुँदैन भन्ने लागेको मलाई। यो कुरा इग्नोर गरियो भने हामीले भविष्यमा ठुलो मूल्य चुकाउनु पर्ने खतरा हुनसक्छ। किनभने अब यस्तो हुन्छ, अब अमेरिकाको चाहिँ यो ग्लोबल पावर हुने एम्बिसन खसिँदै गयो, आफै पातलियो भने के हुन्छ? यो एमसिसी अहिलेकै प्रोजेक्ट चाहिँ यसो कन्स्ट्रक्सन प्रोजेक्ट हुन्छ र यसले ठुलो हामीलाई युद्ध मैदानमा हामीलाई रूपान्तरण गर्दैन। तर जब अमेरिकाको एम्बिसन चाहिँ इन्ट्याक्ट रह्यो, त्यो यथास्थितिमै रह्यो, त्यो बलियो भयो भने चाहिँ अब यो खतरा भएर जान्छ। त्यसैले यो चिजमा चाहिँ अलिक बढी डिबेट आवश्यक छ भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। र त्यस कारणले यो चिज देखिसकेको छ। जस्तो अहिले हामीले के भन्यौँ भने एमसिसीका परियोजनाहरू किन ढिलो भए भन्ने चर्चा गर्दा ब्युरोक्रेसीले फाइल यता लग्यो अरे, गृह मन्त्रालयबाट डिफेन्समा गयो अरे, डिफेन्स गरेर प्राइम मिनिस्टर अफिस आयो अरे, अनि यता उता हल्लिँदा यो सब यो केटाकेटी व्याख्याको कुनै मिनिङ छैन। यो ढिलो हुने सिम्पल कारण के हो भने बिआरआई ढिलो हुने सिम्पल कारण के हो भने बिआरआई ढिलो हुने सिम्पल कारण के हो भने अमेरिकन र इन्डियनहरूको प्रेसरका कारण बिआरआई ढिलो भएको हो भन्ने कुरा बुझिएन भने जियो पोलिटिक्स बुझिएन, वास्तविक कुरा बुझिएन, पुँजी कसरी चल्छ भन्ने कुरा बुझिएन। पुँजी कसरी चल्छ नबुझेपछि मार्क्सवादी हुने कुरा त दूरको कुरा भयो। तर हामी त्यसो गर्दैनौँ। हामी अतापता यो नेता चाहिँ यस्तै हो भनेर एउटा नेतालाई ब्लेम गरिदिन्छौँ अनि ब्युरोक्रेसीले प्रोक्रास्टिनेसन ढिलासुस्तीको कुरा गर्छौँ अनि त्यस पछाडि यता ठुल्ठुला चिजहरू रोकिएको कुरातर्फ जाँदैनौँ र जस्तो BRI परियोजनाहरू रोकिने एउटै कारण के हो भने अमेरिकनहरू आफ्नो प्रभाव यहाँ चाहन्छन् र उनीहरूले आफ्नो प्रभाव प्रयोग गरेर BRI लाई स्लो डाउन गर्छ। इन्डियनहरू पनि BRI स्लो डाउन भएको देख्न चाहन्छन्, त्यस कारणले BRI स्लो डाउन भएको मैले यो अस्तिका पालि पनि भनेको कुरा हो। तर यस कारणले यो चिजसँग जोडेर हेऱ्यो भने सुरक्षा चासो, अमेरिकी सुरक्षा चासो जो चाइनालाई शत्रु बनाएर बनाइएको छ, त्यसमा नेपालले भाग लिनुपर्ने बाध्यात्मक परिस्थितिमा हामी ठेलिनेछौँ। किनभने क्लज 5ले त्यो ठेल्यो, क्लज 5ले हामीलाई त्यहाँ पुर्यायो होइन। सामान्य अवस्थामा भने सुरक्षा चासो सम्बोधन गर्ने कुरा फरक हुँदैन। अब हिजो पनि त थियो होला भन्दा हिजो यत्रो एग्रेसनका साथ थिएन। जति बेला कोल्ड वार थियो त्यति बेला अमेरिका र रसियाको, सोभियत युनियनको कन्फ्रन्टेसन नेपालमा हुँदैन थियो। अब त्यो खतरा नेपालमा छ। चाइना र अमेरिकाको कन्फ्रन्टेसन नेपालमा हुनसक्छ र त्योबाट बच्ने भनेको यो कुरा बुझ्ने र पर्याप्त होसियारी राख्ने मात्रै हो। र मैले फोकस गर्न खोजेको कुरा यो हो। मैले यो भनेर अरू यसका विषयहरू, अरू यसका ब्याक ब्रेकिङ कन्डिसनालिटिजहरू इम्पोर्टेन्ट छैनन् भनेको होइन, तर यो चाहिँ सबैभन्दा खतरनाक पाटो हो भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। एउटा देश युद्धभूमि हुने कुरा चाहिँ सबभन्दा खतरनाक कुरा हो भन्ने लाग्छ। अब म तपाईँहरूका प्रश्नहरूसँग छलफल गर्दा थप कुरा केही भन्ने छु। अलि बढी समय दिनुभएको होला लीलाजीलाई धन्यवाद।
Thank you, Dr. Persai, for your very precise emphasis on two particular issues. One, you mentioned that it is based on the official document published by the United States and policies pursued by the United States since last couple of decades. MCC is a part of Indo-Pacific strategy, no doubt at all. And then second, you mentioned that maybe the world is pushing towards Thucydide trap. In that case, the US has declared China as their enemy, and once Nepal pushes towards the American security alliances through different tools and means, MCC could be one of them. And then if you don't understand this fact, and then Nepal may fall a prey like that Ukraine and Ukraine current. You mentioned Ukraine current. And then last but not least, you mentioned that the root cause of delays in BRI is not the bureaucratic procrastination or something like that. It is due to the India and United States do not want the BRI to move forward, and then they have been able to make delayed those projects using Nepali paraphernalia. That is what I mentioned, and then we specifically highlighted the paragraph 5 of the MCC Compact Agreement. Thank you, Dr. Persai. Second, I would like to invite the speaker online, our technical team. I hope that they are ready to join. Dr. Christian Wagner from Germany. Are you there?
Hello?
Are you listening?
Yes, can you hear me?
Hello? Make the voice a little bit louder so that the audiences can clearly listen.
Okay.
Welcome you, Dr. Wagner. Not
Hello?
listening, no? Can you make
Can you
that sound system?
Can you hear me? Test,
Okay.
test.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Christian Wagner, joining us. Today we have been discussing about the MCC project in Nepal, Indo-Pacific strategy and debates. And we have the very senior political leaders in this forum, and some of the intellectuals, Nepal's well-known intellectuals, and the media persons, academics, and political figures, and also students. Some of the students are also participating here. We have been debating this issue since this morning. Without taking much time, I would like to hand over the forum to you, and then please first briefly introduce yourself and then make your presentation in 15 minutes time. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Hello? Can you hear?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
perfect.
Okay. Thank you.
So I prepared the presentation for today, and I'm sharing the screen very soon. But first of all, I want to thank everyone for this opportunity to talk today. My name is Christian Wagner from Germany. I'm right now at Peking University in China, and before I studied Chinese law, German law, I'm right now in the field of media and especially ideological cognitive warfare and everything in this regard. So my presentation today will be regarding, let me share the screen. One second. Can you see this presentation?
Yeah.
Perfect. So first of all, thanks for this invitation again for all the organizers, also the volunteers who I'm very sure make excellent work for all the different guests and for the organization, and also for me being able to attend online without any big problems. So I'm doing the presentation about the MCC Nepal regarding the legal backdoor for US intelligence and information gathering. Because we're all talking about the MCC, but I'm basically talking about the legal construction inside the USA behind it, which is quite relevant for Nepal. So let me start. Laser pointer. So basically, I'm on the one side talking about the rule of law and the legal regulations inside USA, but on the other side, also in a way, the backdoor practices for NGOs and their, in a way, kind of control and oversight into the internal affairs. So basically, when we talk about USA, we need to always understand also that it's a rule of law state. In a rule of law state, not all the decisions made, especially such big agreements like the MCC, just by bilateral talks and just by one agreement itself. Behind such an agreement like the MCC, there's a huge law, regulation, and framework inside the USA, which is basically discussing and regulating all the different issues regarding MCC before it can be even implemented. So there should be a lot of research, a lot of regulation before the implementation itself. And during the process of implementation, and as it's right now, there will be also different US laws for the US personnel and, let's say, investors on which they are basically, anchored. So these internal laws of USA, of course, for the US, higher than external laws or basically this agreement itself, or especially Nepali law. So we see in this on the right side, the Nepal-US MCC treaty, and on the left, there are different kind of regulations. Of course, for 15 minutes presentation, I cannot talk about all the laws, so I make the most basic ones. First of all, the Millennium Challenge Act of 2003, which is amended 2025. It is the most important framework for understanding this MCC treaty from US perspective and their interest. But also other laws like the Foreign Service Act of 1980, which is highly relevant. And also there are different researchers and practical experiences, evidences from the past of the MCC from different countries. And of course, there are like researchers, US researchers, which are providing the reports for the governments to introduce or explain why it failed, for example. And we are talking about all these 3 points. We are talking less about the MCC treaty itself, more about the laws behind it now. So I think one of the most important laws or articles in the MCC treaty itself, which is the foundation for everything, and I'm very sure during the many presentations you already talked about it in detail, is the article section 6.8, the immunity clause, that basically assumes no liability and waives all the claims against MCC. The US government are basically not implemented, and that the US personnel linked to MCC are immune from the jurisdiction of all courts and tribunals of Nepal, which is a very, very important article for the whole construction behind it in the US legal system and for implementing their policies and interests. So let me give you an example, first of all, because in the immunity clause is even written about the deaths. So if case someone is dying based on the that there is no liability in the USA. And I want to give a case from Germany, a very fast, short case. So even as NATO member of Germany, and we have the NATO Status of Force Agreement, the SOFA in Germany, we had the case last year that US soldier killed a 28-year-old German citizen in a festival, they're drinking and like this happened. And after he died, the German citizen, the US military soldier basically could just go back to USA. All the German laws have not been implemented. He was not going to court. He was going in front of US military courts, and they basically found him not guilty. So what I want to say in regard to Nepal, of course, you need to take high attention about what happens if a person is really doing something with Nepali people, and which law is basically implemented, and is it a lawless area for them? So this is a question, because even in Germany, as one of the most important allies, this kind of case happened. So it's very relevant. So now it's a big slide, and I'm talking a lot about laws, and I'm very sorry if it sounds a little bit dry, but I want to talk about the Millennium Challenge Act of 2003, which is highly relevant. For example, Section 602, the MCC itself purpose is not just promoting economic growth. In the law itself, it's written, it's also investments into people. So I know that I read the contract, of course, which is publicly accessible on the government website of Nepal. And it's more focused on economic interest and economic cooperation. And you will find basically, except this Article 6, not many evidences about this kind of people's effect on the people. But in the law itself, the MCC law of USA, is written specifically investment into people. And this is very relevant when we talk about the interference in internal affairs, because Section 603 defines investment into people as government policies or programs in a legal country that promote the health, education, or other factors. So people can invest, or the MCC can invest into people to fulfill government policies of USA. So questionable is what kind of government policies. For example, promotion of, let's say, democratic values against, let's say, Nepal cultural values. It's questionable. So, but the Section 605 says concrete. There's no official prohibition. There's official prohibition on military assistance. It's basically good news, because there will be no military bases just based on the MCC. This is it's very important. But on the other side, it opens a backdoor for basically intelligence cover. For example, 8 agencies, which I will talk later more in detail. So in Section 607, before doing this agreement between Nepal and the USA, there should be already a huge research in the field of NGO laws. So Section 607 specify, if you see here downstairs, that before doing the agreement, the researchers need to make sure that there are no laws intend to curb the activities of foreign civil society organizations, or paragraph 5, laws regulating the usage of the internet, particularly by foreign civil society organizations. So I recommend to read the whole Section 607, everyone by themselves, because it's very relevant. It means before even doing the cooperation, there is a huge research in the field of which kind of organizations are inside Nepal, and how big is the scope that the own organizations, civil society and organizations, NGOs, which, for example, the US will bring to Nepal, if they have some laws or regulations which are basically making then like a narrow area of work. So they have a more broader scope on how they can implement their own policy and work in the construction, economic construction. And this is very important, because in this case, Nepal cannot make sure how much data they will collect about the economy, about the politics, about everything like this from the civil society organizations. So, and about this organization, these NGOs, I want to go deeper, which will coming probably to Nepal for this whole construction work, economic construction work, which is actually not bad if it's helping the ordinary people, but this is another topic. So And Section 615 of this Millennium Challenge Act of 2003 is specified even that US aid programs should be cooperating with all the other agencies. And US aid, if you see here downstairs in this point, US aid, probably you all know the debate on the X of Elon Musk and Dodge. There are like many public information accessible. This is not something I'm inventing or something. Public information accessible, which are explaining that US aid is doing corruption, that there are some cases of, for example, finance into the media, finance into the public opinion. So this is not something I'm making out of my mind. It's written in the law that they should work with the MCC, this kind of organization, and also the public information, for example, Elon Musk, who was working in the government, show that there's some kind of things happening behind this kind of NGO. So this is very important to take care of. And of course, Section 618 authorizes MCC staff to be embedded in the US embassies protected under Foreign Service Act 3927. We will now talk a little bit more about this Foreign Service Act in the next, because this is very important in the case of internal affairs. So basically, this Foreign Service Act gives the Chief of Mission Authority to the US ambassador about this full MCC cooperation. Means if, of course, the ambassador, this is nothing special or nothing new. Of course, the ambassador is in charge with such kind of situation. But the point is, he's of course representing US interests, and the Foreign Service Act of 1980 implements regulations. I cannot number all of them, but for example, in this case, Section 410, US agencies may compensate foreign employees and contractors imprisoned to US-related work if determined by the Secretary of State. So it provides legal protection for people who are basically working for the MCC and who are even Nepali citizen, but who are working in the interest of USA and going for the prison in the interest of USA, they can be compensated. So this is, of course, is a law. You can interpret it the way you want, but it's laws which are written and which are obvious. So I think I have no time, so let me go to the next point. So why is it important, the work of NGOs like USAID in the construction, in the economic construction? Why a country invests so much money? So first of all, doing this kind of economic cooperation, it makes the economic capture of civil societies, for example, NGO, activists, journalists, internet governance, and of course, border network monitoring. If you build a street and create all this infrastructure, you have, of course, some overview about who is actually engaging and linked with this infrastructure, leaving the country, visiting China, visiting India. So is kind of information work. It's not mainly just about the economic development, it's also about the information itself, which is very, very important these days in the whole international development. Because with information, we have AI, we have different high technology supercomputers. It's easy to predict the future based on the information you have. So if you have a lot of information about Nepal, you can predict by the strategies, which steps or which kind of important key opinion leaders, which kind of important people are relevant to cooperate. So, and here there's a big challenge, a double strategy based on this kind of MCC. I'm talking now about the evidence from the past and from the different other cases in different countries. So there's like one option what could happen now. Basically, you are constructing the country, having huge economic development, which is wonderful for the people. But on the other side, you are like basically connected to supporting, let's say, democratic values, which are very a broad term because And Nepal has so many, let's say, communist parties which are like having the goal of serving the people and let's say socialist ideology. So questionable is already, is it a break of contract? Because in your democracy, there are many, many different, let's say, socialist parties. So this is, again, one point we should think about. And of course, because of the laws I presented, it could be investment into individuals, investment into media, all these kind of things. So it's basically managing and also navigating the development of Nepal in the political sphere. So the question is, of course, it brings stability at one point, but on the other side, option 2, what happens if Nepal goes another way? If they decide suddenly, okay, we do some cooperation with China, will there be a termination of contract, or in the worst case, a repayment clause of misuse for funds will be activated if there's, let's say, a business cooperation with China about constructing, let's say, car factory, and some of the fundings of the MCC will be used. So this is a question, will be the section 5.3 or section 5.1 be activated? So in case Nepal swift towards, let's say, a policy-friendly China or policy-friendly India, or just sovereign policy for their own independence, they already constructed a huge network, they built the streets, and they invest already money. So the question is how it could destabilize even Nepal, or use this kind of new services and structures to destabilize by the intelligence the country. Because the evidences I'm talking after this slide in other countries. So there's a kind of carrot and stick situation. On the one side, you have $500 million in aid, infrastructure, jobs. But on the other side, if you do it other way, based on the law, based on the regulation, the clauses, the contract can be just terminated, and you have a big problem. Yeah. So it's a kind of, no matter which way Nepal is going, it has the big challenges coming up with this kind of situation. So, and last but not least, I'm soon finishing. When I did the research about the different reports for the Congress of the USA, for example, the Millennium Challenging Cooperation Overview and Issues updated on 3rd October 2019. It basically explained that all the failed countries like of the MCC fund, like Yemen, Madagascar, Mauritania, Niger, Honduras, Armenia, Mali, that the main reason is democratic backsliding. What is democratic backsliding? Is it because, let's say, the Nepali people feel they are, let's say, want a sovereign country, want more independence? Is it democratic backsliding? What is democracy? What are the values here? It's not defined really in the contract itself, the MCC. So this is questionable again. I don't want to go into deep because of the time about this, but I just want to make you think about these topics. To contribute into the debate, into the debate. So, and the facts of these MCC funds, the evidence shows that mostly the chaos happens after the funding, not the stability. There are other cases. Let's say, from my research, I think Mongolia was one of the MCC countries, and I've been to Mongolia many times already last years, and it's wonderfully developing. So there could be also, of course, an optimal way of developing of Nepal. Maybe in Nepal is different. We cannot predict the future, but we can just see the laws and see the risks in the laws, and also see the risks for Nepal future. And I hope that with everything I say, I'm wrong, and in the end, it will be wonderful development of the economy. But we should be also realistic and based on the laws and the facts, see the big risks and try to prevent them. So in the summary, legally, based on the law in the US, it grants US extraterritorial immunity in Nepal. It creates a backdrop for intelligence collection through infrastructure, NGOs, and embassy, and provides a political option like termination of the contract, repayment clauses. And in aspect of the Indo-Pacific situation, you all know Nepal better than me and the relevance of Nepal in the whole South Asian region. But we just need to think about the future. What happens if the unification of China with, let's say, the respect the unification process, how will USA react? So this is a question I want to let in the room. And thank you very much for your attention. And I hope to contribute to the debate. And thanks for the invitation. And I hope I can come to a new visit Nepal this year again. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Warner, for your presentation, highlighting and bringing on the different perspectives of MCC, including the international examples. You have summarized your presentation, that's why I don't want to repeat those and then waste of time. Rather, I would like to request you to stay online for a while, about 20 minutes. We are going for the floor discussion Q&A session. For that, I would like to request the volunteers to circulate the mic, and the distinguished audience are requested to raise your hand and then put your comments, remarks or questions, and while putting your question, please introduce you first, then make the question or remarks or your suggestion very brief and short and precise. No need to give examples and clarifications, because we all are somehow knowledgeable on this issue. And then also mention that to whom you wanted to be addressed your question, if you are raising question. With this, I would like to open the floor. First, Professor Sangraula, just raise your hand quickly, and then please, can you hand over microphone? Volunteer, please, in the front row. Or any one of you can write your question slip and then hand over to our volunteers, and then so we can collect also, no? Yeah, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Christian. You made a very, very good presentation, and my very brief and very short question to you is like, can you compare a little bit what happened in Mongolia after termination of the project, so that our colleagues can also learn what happens after the project ends? You said it's chaos, but what type of chaos that you have been talking about? Thank you.
Dr. Wagner, did you listen that question from Professor Sangraula? Professor Sangraula is a professor from Purvanchal University, Kathmandu School of Law. He is a founder of Kathmandu School of Law. Okay, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Professor Sangraula. So about Mongolia case, maybe I said wrong. So when I was visiting Mongolia, I was not, of course, researching on the MCC itself, but based on the conversation I had with the people, there's, of course, a strong development of the society. It's actually a positive development. So I think Mongolia is a positive case and could be even, I'm not sure if Nepal is having a good conversation with the Mongolian government about the experience, but the country is developing. In the main city, Ulaanbaatar, there are many new construction work about the housing. Housing is not so expensive that people can afford it. It's a huge development progress, even faster than the small streets can provide. So in Mongolia right now, there's a good development from my understanding and from the conversation I had with the different politicians there. But it's yeah, I cannot say too many negative points or the challenges, because also the country is a very different. The small population, I think just 3 million people living in Mongolia, in a huge like rural area, fields and street construction. So I can talk about many things, but I'm not a specialist exactly about Mongolia, so I don't want to talk about the things where Mongolians could better talk about their own country.
Just a complimentary question, Christian. Complementary question, like what is the contribution of MCC Pawn in massive economic development of Mongolia. Is that because of MCC, or it is because of the productive process and the industrialization with support of many other countries of Mongolia itself?
So what I experience in Mongolia is especially actually more the cooperation, bilateral cooperation, for example, with South Korea. There are many South Korean products, South Korean investors, South Korean development, South Korea as a very good partner, but also in the area of mining with China, investments from China, also Russia. But the concrete MCC US support in this case is questionable because, for example, let's say 20% of the state assets of Mongolia are, for example, in the hand of BlackRock, finance capital of USA, which is questionable. So, but the real construction work, mostly like South Korean and Chinese contribution. As far as I know, the real contribution of MCC and USA are more in the field of the media cooperation, for example, also UK, the BBC and others.
Yeah, next question from Dr. Rawal. Dr. Rawal is a former Deputy Prime Minister and many ministers in different ministries. This morning while introducing him, maybe one portfolio was maybe missed. He was Minister for Foreign Affairs also for certain period, not? Okay, thank you. The former minister and Deputy Prime Minister and then very well-known politician, Dr. Bhim Rawal. Please.
Thank you. Dr. Wagner, first of all, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to you for your excellent presentation. Would you just say something why the present administration of the USA kept ongoing the MCC project in Nepal, only in Nepal and another country, despite the completely closure of the MCC itself in the United States? Thank you.
Thank you very much for this question. So, of course, it's regarding the Indo-Pacific strategy. Like, because one country and the debate, like when you see the observation, the internal discussion of the MCC, also the US aid funding, the whole NGO work abroad, there was a big slash of this kind of MAGA wing and this kind of America First wing, which is against the, let's say, imperialist attitude, but more for focus on national development, national interest. So it's a paradox situation. Definitely, I fully agree with you. So, and in this kind of paradox situation where there are all values and there are all, let's say, policy guidelines, which are new since the beginning of this year, where they said no US aid and no development in this field. So it's paradox, which makes us give a hint. And even in the, if you see the US media, they are not really talking about the MCC. It's I mean, in the Nepal, it's not really in the debate of the media. Also in, let's say, Europe, whenever I see daily German news, nobody talks about the MCC in Nepal. So this is kind of basically under the table happening. 500 million US dollars are investing into Nepal, and basically the population of USA is kept into dark with this. So why is it happening? From my observation, and it has definitely something to do with the geopolitical strategy of Nepal between China and India and also South Asia. We see also, for example, in Bangladesh, now they have the Starlink and some cooperation with USA, but this is another topic. And also Mongolia, the MCC. So there's around China happening some kind of new development, a new investment strategy of USA, which is obviously some kind of a new, how can I say, big goal, not just focus on Nepal, but of course on the whole region, the region strategy. So I can, for my personal opinion, I can just talk from my opinion, I definitely think it has geopolitical issues, but I hope, even my opinion is like this, I hope still that in the end, of course, there will be prosperous development for Nepal, and I'm wrong with everything I'm saying. And in the end, even if Nepal will do their own sovereign path or cooperation with China or other countries, that still the USA will not sanction them or ask for the termination of the contract. if they are doing this, then of course it shows that their critics are all right. So let's hope for the best in this case.
Once again, thank you very much, Dr. Wagner. I would like to request other distinguished participants to raise questions or put remarks or suggestions. If no questions, and then should I conclude the session? Because you, I request to encourage you to put some question or remarks on the Dr. Wang's presentation, because he has made a presentation this morning.
I have a questions to
Please, to Persign.
to baby expert,
Okay,
baby intellectual.
okay, please.
खगेन्द्र जी को प्रेजेन्टेसन में मुख्य कुरा होल यो क्यापिटलिस्ट सिस्टमलाई नबुझिकन एमसीसी बुझिदैन भन्ने कुरामा त विमति छैन, तर कुन खालको क्यापिटलिजम हो यो जसले एमसीसी इन्करेज गरिरहेछ? कोही साथीहरू भन्नुहुन्छ होइन दलाल पुँजीवाद, कोही साथीहरू भन्नुहुन्छ कुनै के पुँजीवाद, यो उदारवाद पनि पुँजीवाद हो कि होइन? भनेपछि यो कुन पुँजीवाद हो जसले एमसीसी चाह्यो? किनभने अमेरिकालाई इन्टरभेन्सन गर्न त ताकत छँदैछ नि त, एमसीसी किन चाहियो र? भने कुन खालको पुँजीवाद हो जसले एमसीसी रिक्वायर गर्यो? यो अलिकति प्रश्न।
धन्यवाद। यो कहिलेकाहीँ मान्छे बुढो हुँदै गएपछि क्वेसन चाहिँ कडा पनि सोच्दै जाने हुँदो रहेछ कि, त्यसले उनीहरूसँग बुद्धि पनि पाक्छ नि होइन कहिलेकाहीँ, त्यस्तो रहेछ। धन्यवाद। मैले के भन्न खोजेको भने अहिले पुँजीवादै हो भनेर भनिसकेपछि कुन खालको पुँजीवाद अथवा पुँजीवादको कुन पोइन्टमा पुगेपछि अमेरिकालाई एमसीसी चाहियो? अब कतिपय साथीहरूले चाहिँ अमेरिकाले इन्टरभेन्सन गर्न चाह्यो भने त यसै एमसीसी बिना गर्छ भन्नुहुन्छ, तर त्यति सजिलो छैन, कुरा त्यति सिम्प्लिस्टिक छैन। किनभने एमसीसी मार्फत गरेको इन्टरभेन्सन साह्रै सस्तो हुन्छ, साह्रै सजिलो हुन्छ। 8-10 दर्जन नेताहरूलाई खरिद गरेपछि चाहिँ त्यो देश कब्जामा हुन्छ। तर मिलिटरीबाट गरिएको इन्टरभेन्सन चाहिँ धेरै महँगो हुन्छ र त्यसको रेजिस्टेन्स पनि हुन्छ होइन। अब अहिले कुन पुँजीवादको चरणमा यसो गर्नु पर्यो अमेरिकाले भन्दा अघि मैले भने एक ध्रुवीय उदारवादी नव उदारवादी पुँजीवादी व्यवस्था रूपान्तरित भएर बहुध्रुवीय पुँजीवादी व्यवस्थातर्फ गइरहेको सन्दर्भमा तपाईँले अहिलेको पुँजीवादी व्यवस्थालाई, अब मैले यो दलाल भन्ने प्रवर्गबाट अहिले व्याख्या हुँदैन भन्ने म त्यो निष्कर्षमा पुगिसकेको छु। अलग सेसनमा त्यसको बारेमा छलफल हुँदा दलाल पुँजीवाद भनेर जुन व्याख्या गरिन्छ त्यो एकदमै कमजोर व्याख्या भइसकेको छ अहिलेलाई, त्यसको पछि म अलग सेसन होला। तर अहिले चाहिँ हामीले अर्कै खालको मैले प्रयोग गरेको चाहिँ वित्तीय पुँजीवाद भन्ने शब्द प्रयोग गर्छु, र त्यो वित्तीय पुँजीवाद भनेको कस्तो हुन्छ भने विश्वभरि वित्तीय पुँजीवादको विस्तार हुँदा एउटा देशमा त्यसले औद्योगिक पुँजीवाद सिर्जना गर्छ, अर्को देशमा चाहिँ गैर औद्योगिकरण गर्छ, डिइन्डस्ट्रियलाइजेसन गर्छ। त्यो अमेरिकामा पनि डिइन्डस्ट्रियलाइज भएको छ, नेपालको पनि मूलत उद्योग धन्दा भन्दा ब्याङ्किङ पुँजीको वित्तीय पुँजीको हावी भएको पुँजीवाद चाहिँ विकसित भएको हो। र यो सन्दर्भमा अमेरिकाको गिर्दो अवस्था, अमेरिकाले जुन वित्तीय पुँजीवादको नीति लियो र आफ्ना इन्डस्ट्रीहरू 50,000 सङ्ख्यामा भियतनाम, चाइना र अफ्रिकामा सारो, यो सिचुएसनले के उत्पन्न गर्यो भन्दा अमेरिकाको हेजेमनी जुन उसको प्रोडक्टिभ इन्डस्ट्रियल प्रोडक्टिभ क्यापेबिलिटी थियो त्यो चाहिँ डिक्लाइन भयो। त्यो डिक्लाइन हुँदा उसको हेजेमनी, उसको साम्राज्य पनि डिक्लाइन हुँदै गयो है। अनि त्यो साम्राज्यलाई उसले रिस्टोर गर्नको लागि उसलाई चाइनालाई इन्सर्कल गर्यो, किनभने चाइना त इन्डस्ट्रियल क्यापिटलबाट विकास हुँदै गयो। त्यो इन्सर्कल गर्नको लागि उसलाई त्यो सिचुएसनमा उसलाई एमसीसी जस्ता परियोजनाहरू अथवा चाइनालाई इन्सर्कल गर्ने, ताइवानमा उसले फरक तरिकाले ताइवानलाई प्रयोग गर्न खोजेको छ, सिङ्गापुरलाई फरक तरिकाले गर्छ, फिलिपिन्समा त सिधै सेनाका चाहिँ बथानहरू के भन्छ त्यसलाई, सेनाका ट्रुप्सहरू सङ्ख्या बढाएर चाहिँ चाइनासँगको युद्ध उसले तयारी गरेका छ। सबमरिनहरू चाइनाको वरिपरि घुम्छन्, ती अलग अलग छन् संसारमा। तर नेपालमा चाहिँ सिधै त्यो गर्न सम्भव नभएपछि नेपालको राज्य प्रणालीलाई लिएपछि यहाँबाट चीन विरोधी अभियानहरू सञ्चालन गर्न सकिन्छ भन्ने हो। र जहिलेसुकै त्यो चाहिँ एकदम सस्तो हो अमेरिकाको लागि, सम्मत लाग्छ मलाई सम्झा सस्तो। त्यसैले तपाईँको प्रश्नलाई मैले अलिकति मात्रै जवाब दिएँ, पुँजीवादको बारेमा फरक छलफल गर्नु।
थ्याङ्क यू। एउटा प्रश्न छ राधेश्यामजीको, कुड यु एक्सप्लेन वाइ नेपाल किप युर presentation name semicolon Nepal is the backdoor of USA in some point. यो कसले भनेको ब्याकडोर? यो क्वेसन चाहिँ कसलाई हो? यो माइक्रोफोन तपाईँको अगाडि ल्याएर अलिक एक्सप्लेन गरिदिनु होला यो ब्याकडोर। यो यहाँ राधेश्यामजीले क्वेसन गर्नुभएको छ, नेपाल इज दि ब्याकडोर अफ युएसए इन सम पोइन्ट। यो ब्याकडोर कसले भनेको मलाई त अलिक क्लियर भएन, गरिदिनु होला। मैले खालि एकजना उहाँ चाहिँ अहिले हात उठाउनु भएको छ, लास्ट हो, किनभने वी डोन्ट ह्याभ मोर मच टाइम। राधेश्यामजी हो अहिले माइक लिने।
हजुर, सम्पूर्ण नमस्कार। मेरो प्रश्न के रहेछ भन्नाले कृष्णले वाग्नरले के भन्नुभएको छ कि त्यो उहाँ आफ्नो प्रेजेन्टेसनलाई नेपाल इज द ब्याकडोर अफ युएसए भनेर भन्नुभएको छ, त्यो चाहिँ किन भन्नु छ? यसले एक्सप्लेन सम पोइन्टमा एक्सप्लेन गरिदिनुलाई मैले उहाँलाई
थ्याङ्क यू। मैले त्यही कसलाई हो भन्ने मात्रै बुझ्न खोजेको। Dr. Wagner, one of the participants have asked the question that you have mentioned Nepal is the backdoor of USA in some point. Why you keep your presentation in that name? That is what the Mr. Radheshyam wanted to know from you. Thank you. And then please hand over the mic to one gentleman who have raised a hand and then stand up. That will be the last question. We will no more have the time to receive more questions. Floor to Dr. Wagner.
Thank you very much for this question. The title itself was more about the intelligence backdoor of law. Basically, that the laws created right now for this MCC are allowing an intelligence backdoor for the Secret Service in their NGOs, and also by investing. So they can, on the one thing, they can invest into individuals which are working in the US policy, let's say, and values in Nepal, and no matter what is happening with them, they go to prison, they can still be funded by USA. This is written in the laws. And the second is, of course, the economic mapping of the intelligence of this kind of NGOs. They're mapping the whole Nepal, they're mapping the roads, they have all the information. So in case of the, let's say, instability of Nepal, they will have all the information, how Nepal streets are working, how the electricity is working. So they have the absolutely access of all the information. And in this case, information is the most important, because let's say there are some activist groups in Nepal for more independence. And because the US invested all the infrastructure and also has the finance in the media and finance in the whole information network, they know all the information of the people. And if you know all the information of the people, you can, of course, have more control. You have more ways to influence internal affairs and internal policies, internal elections in a case, because you can navigate in some kind by your information network the situation. And information, it's all about the information. And the presentation I made was about this kind of that the law itself, it's not something like a conspiracy theory or something. I wanted to explain that especially the law itself opens the back door. So if we read the laws of USA about the MCC, the national laws, it's basically providing this kind of assistance. So, and for Nepal, it's so important because it's geographically, geopolitical, between India, between and China, and also the economic resources in Nepal. Let's say they are more interested in just road construction, but let's say do more cooperation in the other resources. So this kind of information is, of course, more important than everything. In the modern world, information is everything. So it's this kind of situation brings just basically a legal backup for doing unlimited information work, no matter what happens. If an MCC worker in Nepal is doing some illegal activities, he will be protected by US law. If he is doing some, let's say, espionage, he's protected by this MCC law, and the local courts of Nepal will not be implemented. So this is like a legal, free legal zone for this kind of work, and also that the insight into Nepal's most sensitive areas. So, and of course, it's also making, let's say, ideological changes easily. If the values are, democratic values are more promoted instead of local Nepal cultural identity, local culture, like, because Nepal, when I was there last year, I saw so many different, let's say, how to say it, different from the different regions, different local cultures, so diverse, so much cultural diversity. So this could change into kind of Western values, Western diversity definition and everything like this, because it's the democratic values, and democratic values can be interpreted very broadly. It can be always interpreted the way the West wants, because
Thank you.
this is this. So thank you very much. Sorry for talking
thank you,
so much.
Thank you, Wagner. Controlling infrastructure and information network, through that influence the governance, government, and the make narratives and the that is what you wanted to mention about the backdoor. And the gentleman, please make very short question, because we are running out of time. We are running out of time.
नमस्कार, म धनराज वास्तविक। डाक्टर पर्साईलाई मेरो प्रश्न छ। चीनको विरुद्धमा चाहिँ यो इन्डो पेसिफिक अगाडि बढाइको भन्ने कुरा तथ्य प्रमाणले तपाईँ जतिका मान्छेले भनेपछि हाम्रो पुस्ताले विश्वास गरेको हो। अब सन्देश फरक, तर तपाईँको शब्द सापटी लिएर भन्छु, लिपुलेक दुर्घटनाले अमेरिकाले चाहे जस्तै चीनका विरुद्धमा नेपालमा चीन विरोधी धारणा जन्मिन्छ कि जन्मिँदैन? यसका बारेमा चीन चाहिँ जानकार छ कि छैन, या हुनुपर्छ कि पर्दैन? तपाईँले जियो पोलिटिक्सको कुरा गर्दाखेरि यो प्रश्न जन्मिएको भन्ने मलाई लाग्छ। भारत र चीन बिचको जुन लिपुलेकमा सम्झौता भएको छ, यो लिपुलेक सम्झौताले चीन विरोधी नेपालमा धारणा बन्छ भन्ने मेरो बुझाइ हो। यो बुझाइलाई तपाईँले कसरी सम्बोधन गर्नुहुन्छ? धन्यवाद।
के नाम भन्नु अरे?
धनराज वास्तविक।
ए धनराज जी, ल थ्याङ्क यू भेरी मच। ल भेरी ब्रिफ
होइन, यो यसलाई छोटोमा भन्छु, जस्तो चीनले नेपालका चासोका मामलाहरू एड्रेस गरेन भने पुरानै भारतकै शैलीका हस्तक्षेपहरूलाई व्यवहारमा उतार्यो भने निसन्देह चीन विरोधी धारणा त जन्मिन्छ। तर चीनले त्यसो गर्छै गर्दैन, कति हदसम्म गर्छ भन्ने कुरा अझै पनि हेर्न बाँकी छ। अहिलेकै विषयलाई पनि भारतले पनि करेक्सन गर्छै गर्दैन भन्ने कुरा हेर्न बाँकी छ। तर एउटा कुरो के भने, चीन र भारतको नर्मलाइजेसनले नेपाललाई सामान्यतया लाभ हुनुपर्ने हो। तर यस्तै घटनाहरू हुन सक्छन् कि चीन र भारत मिल्दै भने नेपालले चाहिँ काहीँ न काहीँ भिक्टिम हुनुपर्ने ठाउँहरू, बन्ने ठाउँहरू पनि हुन्छन्। किनभने धेरै चिजहरू जस्तो भारतले जुन चासो राख्छ, चीनको प्रभाव नबढोस् भन्ने त उसको अफिसियल पोलिसी भनेको छ, पार्लियामेन्टरी कमिटीले दिएको। अनि चीनको प्रभावलाई रोक्न ऊ भारत के अरे नेपालको पोलिटिक्सलाई पनि बिथोल दिन्छ, गजाङ र गुजुङ पार्छ, सांसद फुटाइन्छ, पार्टी फुटाइन्छ, यो गर्छ त्यो गर्छ, यो सब गरेको त हामीलाई थाहा छ। त्यसैले नर्मलाइजेसन चाहिँ ओभरअल चाहिँ इन द लङ रन फाइदाजनक हो कि भन्ने मेरो अपेक्षा हो। तर यस्तै भइदियो र यसलाई करेक्सन गरेन चीनले या भारतले भने तपाईँले भने जस्तै विरोधी धारणा त जन्मिहाल्छ, प्रतिवाद त भइहाल्छ। त्यो प्रतिकार त विश्वको सार्वभौम नियम नै हो, होइन? धन्यवाद।
Mindset, and then what Persai responded that in general the cooperation between India and China should have beneficial for Nepal, but we have to see that how these both the countries take their relationship with Nepal forward in the days to come when they are inching together. Otherwise, if they become ignorant about the Nepal interest, that could be the scenario of the post collaborations between two countries. That is what the person responded. I would like to give 1 minute time to share your viewpoints on the today's discussion. And if there was no any question on you. Doctor, yeah. I'm not particularly asking about that question. No, I just because you wanted to engage on the Q&A session with the public discourses, but no one has asked the question on you, and that's why I just wanted to give you a 1 minute floor. It is up to you. whatever you want to say on the topics today we have discussed.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. And I just want to share something with you that, we are from Sichuan University. And before the implementation of the BRI, more than 10 years ago, in our university, there is only a few or almost no only foreign students, international students. But after the implementation of the BRI, so many foreign students come our institution for studying, especially for Nepali students. And before I came to Nepal, almost no Nepalese friends and no Nepalese students. But now, recently, every time when I came to Nepal, so many Nepalese students and friends and give me a very hospitality and invite me to go somewhere and to have some dinners. Yes. So every time when I came at Kathmandu, just like a very good feeling. So I really want to say that Kathmandu, Nepal, just like my second home. So thank you so much, giving me such a good opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Huang, for your kind providing a lot of opportunities for Nepali students to study there. And then your contribution is promoting people-to-people relations is definitely praiseworthy. I would like to comment on that. Thank you. I hope and wish that we will continue to receive your support and cooperation to promote our mutual interest, both countries' interest, at the benefit of both the people and country. With these words, once again, I would like to thank you all the panelists, including Dr. Wagner online, and also Dr. Persai and Dr. Huang. And also would like to thank you all the participants for bearing with us during this entire session, and then making this session lively by raising some questions from the floor and engaging on the discussions. With these words, thank you very much, and I declare the conclusion of this session. Thank you.
हजुर निर्मल सर धन्यवाद। अब हामी अर्को लास्ट सेसनमा जानुभन्दा पहिला मेरो यो कर्तव्य रहन्छ कि उहाँलाई टोकन अफ लभ दिनुपर्ने, र टोकन अफ लभ मैले यही किताब लिएर आएको छु। त्यसको लागि उहाँ त सम्पादकै हो यसको। अब हाम्रो लास्ट सेसन हामी सुरु गर्न गइरहेका छौँ र यसको चेयर गरिदिनुहुन्छ मिलन तुलाधर। मिलन तुलाधरजी पहिला हेड सरको रूपमा काम गर्नुभयो, त्यसपछि इसी मोड अन्तर्राष्ट्रियमा 27 वर्षसम्म त्यहाँको डिभिजनल हेडको रूपमा काम गर्नुहुन्थ्यो। त्यहाँबाट रिटायर भएपछि उहाँ प्रधानमन्त्रीको सल्लाहकार, हाम्रै माननीय झलनाथ खनालज्यू त्यो बेला प्रधानमन्त्री हुँदा उहाँ सल्लाहकार हुनुहुन्थ्यो, र त्यसपछि उहाँ एम्बेसडरको रूपमा रस्सामा बसेर काम गर्नुभयो र अहिले हाम्रो माझमा हुनुहुन्छ, र म उहाँलाई चेयरमा आउनुको लागि आमन्त्रण गर्दछु। र यो सेसनको शीर्षक रहेको छ द एमसिसी इन श्रीलङ्का लेसन लर्न्ड। बडो इन्ट्रेस्टिङ टपिक छ, र यसको लागि प्रेजेन्टर हुनुहुन्छ मिस्टर श्रीरान इलोपिनोमा, रिसर्चर टिल्कुरान श्रीलङ्का, र उहाँ त्यहाँको कम्युनिस्ट पार्टीको सदस्य पनि हुनुहुन्छ। सर
First of all, I would like to warmly welcome the well-known journalist and researcher on political economy, Mr. Siran Ilan Peruma. I don't know whether I pronounce correctly, from Sri Lanka. He will be making his presentations on lessons learned in Sri Lanka. In Nepal, we have a lot of references made to Sri Lanka about the debt crisis in 2022. But the situation of Sri Lanka is totally different. I visited Sri Lanka since I developed a friendship with Sri Lankan friends in Moscow. While I was in Moscow, I had many Sri Lankan friends, including 2 ambassadors, consecutive ambassadors in Sri Lanka. They were very good friends of mine. So I immediately visited Sri Lanka after coming back from Russia. So I found the situation of Sri Lanka as I had seen. It may be different. He will make the real presentation. He will give you the real presentation about Sri Lanka. At least from my visit to Sri Lanka, during my visit to Kandy and Colombo and few places, so I could say that it's totally different situation in Sri Lanka from what we have been making all kind of noises about Sri Lanka debt crisis in Nepal, and Nepal should not become like Sri Lanka, and like these type of references doesn't make any sense. From my point of view, he will make the presentation. In the past, I just like to make some references of Sri Lanka and Nepal. We had learned quite a lot from Sri Lanka. In 1930s and 1940s, early 1940s, Nepal went through serious religious repression during this was, I'm talking of the last few years of Rana rule. The Buddhist monks were extradited from the country as they were considered dangerous elements by the Rana rulers. In 1946, there was a new Rana prime minister called Padma Samset. He came to power in 1946. At that time, there was a Sri Lankan monk called Narad Bhante. Narad Bhante visited Nepal, and he met Padma Samset and requested for the return of the exiled Nepali monks back to Nepal. And Padma Samset listened to his logic, and he fulfilled the demands of Narad Bhante, and also allowed for the first time for the Nepalese Buddhists to celebrate the Buddha Jayanti. So for the Nepalese Buddhists only, Buddha Jayanti was declared holiday by Padma Samset. That was at the request of Narad Bhante from Sri Lanka. Immediately after the end of the Rana rule, King Tribhuvana declared the day a national holiday. Then it became total national holiday. Tribhuvan declared that. So we, in the land of Buddha's birthplace, we needed inspiration from Sri Lanka to reinstate Buddhism in Nepal. So Buddhism in Nepal was reinstated by the efforts of Sri Lankan monks during Rana rule. So that was the first relation I wanted to make the connection between Sri Lanka and Nepal. Then second thing I wanted to mention, Sri Lanka hosted non-aligned members movement summit meeting in August 1976. That is about half a century ago. Fifth non-aligned summit was held in Sri Lanka. So Sri Lanka presented as a very powerful nation in the non-aligned movement. Nepal was also a founder member of non-aligned movement. And in Nepal, the Constitution of Nepal enshrines the non-alignment, Panchashil, and UN Charter as part of Nepalese Constitution. There's a provision for that. Yet, we have deviated from the basic principles of non-alignment from time to time. Just take example of our two big neighbors. We had a lot of imbalanced relationship with these two big neighbors between whom we are sandwiched. And there are problems when they fight each other. There are problems when they come close between them. We have problems. It's because we are very, very weak. Our economy is very, very weak. Our political stability is not there in Nepal. So with all this difficult situation in Nepal, people try to take advantage, all the big superpowers and the big neighbors, they take advantage from our weakness. Now, regarding economic data, Mr. Siran Ilaperuma will give more detailed figures, but what I have seen is the GDP of Sri Lanka is about $99 billion, and their growth rate is 5%, and per capita income is about 4,516. They export 16 billion worth of goods and services and import 19 billion. Now, comparing size of Nepal, compared to Nepal, Sri Lanka is less than half the size, the physical area. And population is only 2/3 of Nepal. In terms of land, Sri Lanka is equivalent to, it is less than our Sudur Pachim Pradesh, Karnali Pradesh, and Lumini Pradesh, 3 provinces of Nepal together, is about 70,000 square kilometers. Sri Lanka is only 65,000+ square kilometers. So that is the size of Sri Lanka. With that size, they have $99 billion economy, the GDP. Nepal has 43 billion GDP. So this is our weakness. You see the difference, the economic difference in the economic scale. And our per capita GDP is about $1,389 compared to Sri Lanka's $4,500. And our export is about $1.3 billion, and that is also all based on all kind of distorted figures of our trade with India, like soybean oil and all sorts of things. And our import is $13 billion. We have a $12 billion of deficit, and Sri Lanka has $3 billion of trade deficit. So in 2022, definitely there was a big crisis in Sri Lanka. It was basically debt default. At that time, the economical investment in Sri Lanka, and also the repayment of debt, and also the COVID crisis. All this caused a debt crisis in 2022, definitely. That was there. But they recovered from that. And as I had presented, the present situation of Nepal and Sri Lanka, it's a way different, totally. We are way behind Sri Lanka in terms of economy, as I have presented the hard figures as given by the World Bank. Yet our folks here are never tired of talking about Sri Lanka example as debt crisis. Sri Lanka is a failed state and all these things. So it doesn't make sense. Now we will know from Mr. Siran Ilan Peruma, what is the exact situation of Sri Lanka, and they didn't have MCC in 2020. It was not there. There was a discussion, but it didn't come there. Still, they made a big progress compared to us. It's 5% GDP growth is not very high, but in the international world, in terms of world growth rate, it is definitely on the high side. So this story, I would once again, I'm making all these things into light because I would like to request Mr. Siran Ila Peruma to also cover in his presentation how Sri Lanka succeeded in making recovering from this economic crisis in 2022, from this debt crisis in 2022, how they made the economic recovery so that our people in Nepal are well enlightened about the actual situation of Sri Lanka. Thank you very much, and the floor is yours, Mr. Siran Ila Peruma.
Thank you very much for that generous introduction, Mr. Milan. And greetings, namaskar to everyone here, distinguished guests, friends, colleagues, comrades. So yes, my name is Shiran. I'm from Sri Lanka, where I'm a journalist and a political economist. I've been asked to speak a little bit about Sri Lanka's experiences with the MCC compact, how it came into the country, how people perceived it, how we protested against it, and how in the end it was rejected. And also a little bit about the consequences of that rejection. I also want to quickly say thank you to the organizers, the Foundation for Peace, Development and Socialism. What an amazing name for a foundation. I wish every country in the world had a foundation like this. It's a great honor to be in Nepal, my first time here. All right, so I work for an institute called the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. I'm going to quickly introduce us. So we're an international institute. We work very closely with social movements across the global south. The Tricontinental means Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We have actually talked about the MCC before. You see the picture there, we had a collaboration with Dr. Mahesh Maski, who I think will be speaking tomorrow. And we published this document about Nepal's fight for sovereignty, about Nepal's fight against the MCC. I encourage you all to have a look at that when you get some time. It's available for free online. Right, so MCC in Sri Lanka, lessons learned. These are the broad points that I'll be talking about today, the facts behind the MCC, the development of it over time, the main controversies, popular perceptions, how it impacted our domestic political processes, and the key lessons learned. I think all the speakers before me have done such a good job talking about the MCC and its origins in US legislation that I don't need to go over it again. But some very basic facts. The MCC compact, which was proposed to Sri Lanka, was a grant of $480 million US. You just heard how big our GDP is, close to 100 billion. 480 million is not that much money, first of all, even though they say it's a grant, right? Remittances alone, we get about 10 billion per year. So 480 million, first of all, was not that big of a grant. The stated mission, obviously, you know, they package it, they frame it in this lovely way. It's we're going to reduce poverty, increase productivity, increase growth. I don't know how you can do that with $480 million, but this was This is what they said. The targeted sectors is what's really interesting, and I'll be discussing this more. Transport, right, to improve the infrastructure and to reduce traffic reduction, to improve connectivity in the country, and land, specifically to digitize the land registry. Now, in Sri Lanka, 80% of the land is actually owned by the government. We do not have a huge amount of privatized land in our country. That's a unique historical feature of Sri Lanka. For the left in particular, for progressive movements, it's a very useful feature in our country because it allows us to explore non-capitalist path of development. It allows us to try and develop cooperatives and collective structures in agriculture. But of course, the neoliberal agenda wants to do away with that. So immediately when they were talking about introducing a land bank and digitizing the land registry, it sounds good from a management perspective, but alarm bells were ringing because we know the agenda behind this was to eventually privatize the land. That's what people were saying. And then ultimately, they say it's a grant, it's not a loan, they say it's free, but there are conditions. You have to qualify for the MCC, and you have to keep meeting the various agendas that they set, right? So it's not really a no strings attached situation, right? To qualify for it itself is a process of political reform within your own country. Now, the Sri Lanka case has to be understood in a conjunctural sense, right? This came at a very particular moment in our economic and political history, right? So the historical context was that in 2009, a civil war, a 30-year-long civil war ended. The government defeated a separatist group. Of course, the war was very brutal on both sides. I cannot hide that or give any cover for that. But at the same time, I think people were very happy that this separatist group was defeated. It opened up a certain amount of space in Sri Lanka to talk about different issues, to talk about economic issues, and there was a wave of patriotism within Sri Lanka, a wave of nationalism. And, as the Marxists here know, nationalism is a double-edged sword. There's a good side and there's a bad side, but it is what it is. This was the context in Sri Lanka. There was a wave of nationalism since 2009 up to the point where the MCC came in, and people were very conscious about the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of their country. So sovereignty is key. Geopolitical context is, of course, the Indo-Pacific strategy. I mean, all of you know about this. There's not much more I have to say, but Sri Lanka in particular plays a very key role, heart of the Indian Ocean. 2/3 of global trade passes the Sri Lankan waters, our exclusive economic zone. A lot of fuel specifically that goes to Southeast Asia, to China, right? China's energy security also depends on Sri Lanka and Sri Lanka's geopolitical kind of affiliation. And it's quite clearly stated in a lot of US documents that Sri Lanka is important, that it's the key of the Indo-Pacific strategy. Someone said Nepal was the back door, right? Sri Lanka is the front door, basically. Economic context is, after the war ended, though it was a very speculative, neoliberal-driven boom, right? It was a boom based on tourism, based on real estate. So the bubble of that development popped around 2012, right? So you had a situation where, yes, you had all of this ideological patriotism, but the economy was not doing so good by 2015 when the MCC was coming in. So you can see why certain elites would be drawn to it, say, okay, economy is not doing so well, let's take this money, let's try do something else. Finally, there's the timing. The MCC didn't come to Sri Lanka on its own. It came with a whole package of other things. There was the SOFA and the AXA agreement. Both of those are military agreements. I don't have a lot of time to talk about them, but they basically entail a certain amount of interoperability between Sri Lanka and the US military, allowing US forces to enter through Sri Lanka, allowing them to do logistics and training of personnel and all sorts of things. So again, even though the military aspect is not necessarily coded into the MCC, when you do a conjunctural analysis and when you see everything else that it's paired with, there is alignment, right? And all the speakers before me have spoken about that alignment. So this is a quick timeline. The whole MCC saga basically happened in the span of 5 years, but it even goes before that. So those are pictures of 3 of our presidents. So 2004 to 2007, we had President Mahinda Rajapaksa, kind of center-left guy from a very nationalist background. He's the president who led during the war era. It was actually him that first went to the MCC and asked for the grant. And interestingly, he didn't receive it, right? So that's an open question also. Why would a president who goes and asks for the MCC not receive it? Like I said earlier, you have to do certain things to qualify it. You don't just get the grant. If you don't have the political will internally to implement those reforms that they ask for, you don't get the grant. In 2015, Mahinda Rajapaksa lost the election and we got Maithripala Sirisena, right? Now, there's a lot of conjecture about that government. One view is that there was a sort of a soft color revolution, a regime change operation. Again, that's conjecture, but just putting it out there, this perception was there among some people. Immediately, there was a shift in foreign policy. There was a shift in economic policy more towards the neoliberal side. And you can see the government started having dialogues again to renew this MCC grant. Again, by 2016, we've implemented grants. By 2016, we've gone to an IMF program, and the US suddenly says, okay, now you're eligible to get the MCC. Interesting. By 2017, the government starts doing its own constraints analysis. By 2018, we start negotiating the actual details. And then April 2019, the MCC board of directors, they basically approved the compact for Sri Lanka. So there's about a 3 to 4 year long period of negotiations, of reforms, a lot of things happening within Sri Lanka at that time, a lot of protests. But the MCC ultimately didn't go through. 2019, there was an election. Mahinda Rajapaksa's brother, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, came into power. He came into power in a very nationalistic upsurge. But there was also an economic thing behind it, because as I mentioned earlier, President Maithripala Sirisena was undergoing an IMF program. So there was a lot of austerity on the one hand. People were suffering with high taxes. On the other hand, you had an upsurge in nationalism. President Gotabaya Rajapaksa rode that very effectively. The MCC thing, the MCC issue was huge in the election. I'll go into it more. It was huge. Basically, the president pledged that he wouldn't sign it. One of the first things he did when he came into power, he put in place a review committee. They went through the whole thing and they had a report, very controversial report. Interestingly, the report wasn't published in English, which is a little unusual for Sri Lanka. Something like this would usually come out in English. It was only in Sinhalese. Again, a reflection of the nationalistic kind of background behind it. The government didn't say no to the MCC. They said we cannot sign it in its current form. And ultimately, the US withdrew. They said due to lack of partner country engagement, we're not going to go ahead and we'll take the money elsewhere. I want to talk a little bit now about the popular perception of the MCC, what people in Sri Lanka were saying, thinking, feeling. And I'm trying to give a little bit of a class analysis as well while doing this. This cartoon here, it's a little crude. It's by a very popular newspaper cartoonist. Yeah, you see a half undressed man over there supposed to represent a Sri Lankan politician, and then the Chinese caricature we're holding the Belt and Road suitcase, and Uncle Sam trying to get in with MCC. So it's both anti-Chinese and anti-US. This is a kind of thing that's there among some popular cartoonists. I don't necessarily endorse the anti-Chinese message in this, but I think this is very interesting of showing what people were thinking and feeling. So in terms of opposition, I broadly categorize the opposition into two streams, a nationalist stream and a more socialistic stream. The nationalist stream was basically on the issue of sovereignty, on the issue of territorial integrity, right? That was what they were mainly concerned about. And you had here a lot of intellectuals, very petty bourgeois intellectuals, teachers, religious leaders, politicians. Religious leaders played a very big role. If you know anything about Sri Lanka, the Buddhist monks, very nationalistic historically, that can go both ways. Sometimes it's progressive, sometimes it's reactionary. In this case, I think they played a progressive role by resisting the MCC. Then you had the socialist opposition. This was a more humanistic and I would say a more rational opposition. The argument here was that the MCC was bringing in and intensifying the neoliberal economic agenda. because the agenda was to weaken state capacity, to allow private multinational corporations to participate in the Sri Lankan economy in crucial areas like land and transport. That it would be an erosion of economic sovereignty, that it would hurt the interests of workers and peasants, particularly small farmers. On the other hand, let's look at the kind of people who are supporting it, right? Again, I categorize this into two groups, the compradors and the technocrats. Right? The compradors are the classic kind of dependent bourgeoisie you get in a lot of our underdeveloped countries. These are the people who are traders, some of them are exporters. They completely depend on the West for their economic existence. So when Uncle Sam says to jump, they ask, how high? They are the ones who lobby the government to do these things. So some of them were right-wing politicians, and as I said, businessmen. On the other hand, and this is what I find interesting in Sri Lanka, is there's a sort of technocratic aspect. You have a layer of white-collar professionals, lawyers, economists, journalists, a lot of them depending on the NGO sector, depending on foreign-funded, mainly US-funded think tanks, right? So there's a whole economic infrastructure behind this middle class. And they were the ones making the argument on grounds of economic efficiency. So basically on neoliberal grounds, that we should be taking this MCC grant and we should do the reforms because we need to do the reforms anyway with or without the MCC. That was the argument that they were making. Is a little bit of an illustration of the kinds of opposition. There was a huge upsurge of protests. I know because I was there in some of these protests, and I remember working with colleagues in trade unions and so on, drafting these statements and driving around, giving it to different embassies and politicians and so on. The big picture you see there on the left, that is a protest in front of the US embassy by a party called the JVP, Janata Vimukti Peramuna. They're actually the party in government right now. And the guy standing in the center with the face mask, he's right now our foreign minister, Vijay Dehera. On the top, you see a more nationalistic sort of people. You see the Buddhist monk right in front. You see the signs talking about MCC. Again, bottom right, you see there's a monk there. He was on a hunger strike. This was huge news in Sri Lanka. This monk went on a hunger strike and demanded that all the political leaders, write and say that they wouldn't sign the MCC. On the other hand, those two pictures in the middle at the bottom, those are what I said about the technocrats. About you had all of these sort of AC room discussions with these people from the MCC, from USAID, and all these think tanks talking about what great things the MCC would do for Sri Lanka. So you can see the sort of class disparity, the class struggle that was inherent in this whole MCC movement. Like I said, the whole question of MCC deeply impacted the Sri Lankan political landscape at the time, right? It was a decisive issue. The nationalists are the ones who most successfully used it as a political campaign issue, right? And it was fused with the economic dissatisfaction from an ongoing IMF-led austerity program. The picture I have here, it's sort of it's a sketch of an actual event where the MCC Review Committee handed over the report on the MCC to President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. And I'm going to go a little bit about the MCC Review Committee's findings, because I think this is probably the most, might be the most interesting thing from your perspective, especially since it's not available in English. I thought it would be useful to have a summary. So we've got a table here. And the MCC stated intent and what the review committee said in their report, their interpretation of the MCC's true intentions. So the overall goal was said to be to stimulate economic growth, reduce poverty, so on and so forth. The review committee was pretty clear, given the context of what was happening globally, that the actual intent was to embed Sri Lanka in the US Indo-Pacific strategy. This came about through a lot of different discussions, because in the whole transport infrastructure program, one of the ideas was to link Colombo, which is on the western coast, to Trincomalee, which is on the eastern coast, right? So it would be a line going right through the country of transport infrastructure. Now that's a very sensitive area because there's a lot of natural resources, a lot of rare earth minerals, phosphates, what have you. And if the US was going to be involved in this, if the MCC was going to be involved in this, there would be private contractors. The surveying would be done by them. All of the information would be in their back pocket. That's a huge question of sovereignty. There was also some conspiracy theories, because this is yet to be proven, that that corridor could have been used for transferring US troops from one end of the island to another. That's not proven, but this was a concern that was raised in civil society, right? And that comes to the second point there, the transport project, right? That it could facilitate dual-use transport corridors for military logistics. I mean, for those of you who don't know, that the Trincomalee has one of the best deep water ports in the Indian Ocean. It is a very crucial port in the Indian Ocean, and for that reason, it has never been allowed to develop. No sovereign Sri Lankan government has been able to develop that port because it has such huge security implications for both India and for the US. Land administration project, again, the major concern was that it would violate Sri Lankan jurisdiction, that would enable foreign control of strategic parcels of land. Implementation clauses, again, very similar to the concerns you have here in Nepal, that there's an extrajudicial legal space, right? That the certain laws, once you sign the agreement, they supersede domestic law. And they are actually, in Sri Lanka, the committee went as far as to say that they are in violation of the Sri Lankan constitution. So they made the argument that constitutionally, we could not sign this. Funding structure, this is an interesting one. You know, again, we were told the same thing, that this is not a loan, it's a grant, right? The Chinese come and give you loans and you get into a debt trap. The US is nice, they're giving you a grant. This is the argument that they were trying to make. But what the review committee found was that the funding, despite being a grant, still creates policy leverage, because as I said before, you have to qualify, right? Some presidents qualify, some presidents don't. Some countries qualify, some countries don't. That is such an important thing to keep in mind. And the fact that the qualifications are based on this idea of good governance, which sounds fantastic, but it's really more of a neoliberal project of reducing democratic control over the economy, right? To have more private interests in the economy, to privatize the economy. That's what they really mean by good governance. Right? It's governance by international finance capital. Timeline and urgency. What the review committee said was that there was a lot of pressure from the US side to sign this and to sign it quickly. Probably because they knew that the government at the time was not that popular and would not last another election. But the very fact that there was such urgency to sign it, they said that it creates pressure that stops the country from doing due diligence, that if we rush into this, we're not doing due diligence, we're not doing the legal scrutiny that we should be doing before entering into an agreement like this. And then the integration with defense agreements. Again, this has been repeated. I'm going to say it again, that contextually, there is a high degree of alignment between Indo-Pacific strategy, between the SOFA and AXA agreements, which the government was being pressured to sign, and between this. It comes in one package, right? You can't do this kind of bourgeois thing of drawing a neat line between economy, politics, foreign affairs, and so on. That's not how capitalism works. That's not how the world works, right? In a historical materialist perspective, all of these things are integrated and dialectically connected. There were no Marxists in the review committee, but they were wise enough to point this out. And finally, about the economic metrics, they basically made the argument that yes, it would be nice to have the grant, but there are long-term strategic issues to be considered. How much is your sovereignty worth? How much is control over your land, your resources, and most importantly, data, right? Back then, I think people still didn't understand the importance of data, but as we're entering into this AI revolution, data is so important, especially data about your own national economy and your own resources, right? So aside from just getting the money, it's, all of those things are also economic factors. They have to be calculated, So ultimately, this review committee said, don't sign the MCC. The government, it said don't sign the MCC in its present form, which I think diplomatically was a wise thing to say. A small country, weak country, you can't go out guns blazing. Not everyone can be, Cuba level, Cuba level of integrity. Sri Lanka is in a different level of development in its public consciousness. Luckily, the MCC wasn't signed, right? And these are the key lessons that I take away. Firstly, a united front in challenging it was very important. What you had, like I said, the nationalistic stream and the socialistic stream joining together, you had a coalition of different class interests who were opposing MCC for very different reasons, but they came together at a very crucial conjuncture, right? So both sovereignty and dignity, these are two words, that we use in the Tricontinental Institute a lot, sovereignty and dignity. Sovereignty, of course, has a patriotic, nationalistic connotation, but dignity is also important, right? Because we want to be a sovereign nation, but we want our people to also have dignified lives. We want their livelihoods to be taken care of and not ruled by multinational corporations. In the Sri Lankan case, and I would sadly have to defer a little bit with Mr. Milan's introduction, is the same government that rejected the MCC went into a real and severe economic crisis that led to the collapse and the debt default in 2022. In some sense, the gains were lost, because when we defaulted, we were anyway forced to go to the IMF. And in the past few years, we've been going through a very brutal austerity program. Electricity prices in 2022 were increased by 264%. Half of the families in Sri Lanka are skipping a meal a day. And about half of the Sri Lankans who study in public universities are migrating overseas for jobs because there's no opportunities at home. This is not because we rejected MCC. I know that argument is made here in Nepal, but as I said, that's a ridiculous argument to make because it's such a tiny amount of money. And if you look at other case studies, even countries that sign on to MCC, they can barely get that money released on time. This is not about MCC. In fact, it was about the debt that we had to private creditors in the West, right? So the same government that was trying to do MCC, that same government increased our external debt stock by 42% because they were borrowing from BlackRock and Citibank and all of these Western companies. That's what led to the collapse. Now, Sri Lanka is unfortunately structurally, even without the MCC, more integrated into the US orbit than it was before. And I think the important lesson to learn there is that MCCs come in many forms. Yeah. You don't necessarily need to sign the MCC to get the effects of MCC. It can, the US are smart. They'll be very happy to withdraw it and come to it in another way. What's important, I think, is, and what the nationalists always fail to do, is it's not just about articulating your opposition on grounds of sovereignty. It's also to create a new model, an alternative model that can serve people's interests, right? So the nationalist government, they were not able to do that. When the country was in crisis, they stopped imports of fertilizer, which destroyed the peasantry, right? They didn't ration fuel, which they could have, but they favored the urban interests instead, right? The middle class and so on, they didn't want to upset them. I think what countries like Sri Lanka and what countries like Nepal need, given our underdevelopment, is that we need a new model for modernization that is not the neoliberal model. And China is not going to give us that model. I think the BRI is very helpful. We can use it, but we have to use it wisely. We have to know what to ask for. Development policies have to be tied with the interests of the people to give people a dignified living. We need to improve their education, get technology transfers. I think we need to be pressuring China more to give those technology transfers. And, all of those things are important. So I'm just going to end on that note. And if there are any questions, I'm very happy to answer them. You can contact me if you wish. That's my email. I'm on WhatsApp on that number as well. But thank you very much.
So the floor is open now. So Dr. Professor Sangraula has a question. Mr. Siran. Yeah. So, Mr. Professor Sangraula.
So my very quick question is like, my questions to you. See, I mean, if you see the South Asian landscape, MCC in Sri Lanka and MCC in Nepal almost conceived in the same time. Nepal received approval of MCC without fulfilling most of the criteria when it was given. So Nepal had still not yet fulfilled many criteria to get it endorsed by MCC board, but still they said that yes, okay, we will give you. Sri Lanka probably fulfilled certain criteria, but still not some all. So why these two countries, but not Bangladesh, not Afghanistan, not other countries like below South India and upper north of India, why these two countries were politically chosen? Do you see any very important political strategy regarding these two countries given MCC? Have any discussion regarding this in Sri Lanka or not? That's what I would like to know.
Thank you. That's a very good question. It's a bit easy for me to answer for Sri Lanka. Nepal, I have to think about it, but Sri Lanka is in the Indian Ocean. It's very important for shipping routes. And it was very important during the Cold War from a strategic geopolitical perspective, and it's very important now. It's no surprise that Sri Lanka was the poster child for this idea of Chinese debt trap, if you remember the whole Hambantota port issue, right? And because Sri Lanka's relationship with China goes back to the 1950s. In fact, outside of the sort of Soviet socialist bloc, Sri Lanka was one of the first trading partners of China. And it allowed China to break through the embargo, right? If you know your history, before the reform and opening up period, China was under a severe embargo. And it was their relationship with Sri Lanka which enabled them to trade with the outside world. And even now, as China is coming up, I think they've deleveraged that risk, because now they have more trade with Central Asia through the land route, but the sea route was very important to them. I think that's why Sri Lanka in particular was so important to the US strategically, because remember that the US and the Western colonial empires, these are naval empires, yeah? These are sea-based empires. Russia and China are different, they're more land-based, historically speaking. So I think that's why Sri Lanka was so important. Nepal, I confess I'm a little ignorant about Nepal. I don't know enough. I suspect the importance of Nepal from an energy perspective, the vast amount of hydroelectric potential that exists in this country, and also its strategic location, along the old Silk Route. I imagine Nepal would have been a much more stable option than Afghanistan. But I'm not sure why Nepal would have been chosen over Bangladesh, for example. I mean, I would like to hear your opinion, actually. I mean, I could learn from you, maybe.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Shiran Illaperuma for your excellent presentation. I have very short remark. I found the major points raised by the committee formed in Sri Lanka and the facts and suggestion submitted to then government headed by KP Oli by the task force under the convenorship of Mr. Jhalnath Khanal. I found very much similarities, very interesting. And even as a member of the task force, I remember we have raised several other questions which supersede the constitutional and legal provisions of Nepal and serve US security interest. That is very interesting, first. Second, as you elaborated about the privatization of the land, which so far 80% owned by the state of Sri Lanka, in Nepal, under the Oli's government previously, the Minister of Land Reform and Management tried to implement the same scheme under the banner of Land Bank. We oppose that. So the strategy is more or less similar. Relating to transport, now Nepal is under the US-Bangladesh joint companies scheme of providing so-called invoice number. The data of all vehicle owner is going to the store of US-Bangladesh company. And billions of rupees is also going to their pocket, in their pocket, from Nepali people. So the scheme relating to transport, land, interestingly found similar. So I am very much enlightened while I listen to your presentation. And one question for you, would you just say something which is very much talked in Nepal relating to the so-called debt trap to Sri Lanka? Though when I studied the whole ratio of international loan and loan, I did not find so. So would you just shed light briefly on this issue? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Regarding the similarities, land and transport, I guess it's really not surprising considering how crucial they are to control the arteries of trade and production, right? So these are natural monopolies. You don't have to be a Marxist to know that. Even Adam Smith or David Ricardo would make that argument, and therefore they need to be publicly administered and owned. Regarding Hambantota Port, that's very interesting because the New York Times article that came out was blatantly incorrect, but it stuck in people's minds that they still use this example as the Chinese debt trap. What really happened, actually, is that the idea of the Hambantota Port has been there from long before China came to this level of development. It has been there, I think, probably since the 60s, 50s or 60s, because it's an ancient port. Before the rise of the West, the major ports in Sri Lanka were in the south and in the east. Right? Colombo rose up as a port only during the colonial era. The government wanted to develop that port, and actually the first studies that were done by a Canadian company. The government approached the US to fund this. They approached India to fund this. Nobody had the money after the financial crisis, the Great Recession 2009. Only China had the money. So it's not like China came up with the idea, and it's not like we were only speaking to China. They just happened to have the money, and they happened to be willing to work on the project, which was a Sri Lankan idea. Now you can say there's all sorts of issues with it. I mean, any kind of industrial endeavor has certain effects on the environment and on people. But those are mainly on the side of the Sri Lankan government, whatever shortcomings are there. It's their responsibility to do that due diligence. Regarding the debt, there was an original plan on how this port should be staged. It will develop in stages so that it can start generating money before you go to the next stage. The Sri Lankan government wanted to rush through the stages. So they wanted to go to stage 2 before stage 1 was making money. That's on them, right? That's their mismanagement. The Chinese, like, they're not gonna say anything, right? Okay, you want to do it? Fine, we'll do it, even though it's not recommended. So yes, the port was making losses. I mean, it's a $3 billion port in a rural area in Sri Lanka. It's not going to make, it's a long-term investment. It's not going to make profits overnight. Interestingly, the government that gave the port to a Chinese company, and by gave, I mean it's basically a soft privatization. They were given a 99-year lease. It's not a total privatization. That government was a pro-West government. It was not a pro-Chinese government. They did that because they had other debts to pay. Because they had an upcoming debt payment to the international creditors, right, private creditors, and they were desperate because they didn't have the money at the time. So they went to the Chinese side and say, okay, can you take this off our hands? They took the money from the Chinese and gave it to the Western creditors. That's what actually happened. And this has been recorded, I think, by Johns Hopkins University studies, right? So not exactly, leftist or pro-Chinese or whatever. These things are factually recorded. The other thing is, and I think this lesson applies to everyone on BRI, is that Chinese can only give you the asset. You have to come up with the industrial policy to make that asset work. The point of Hambantota Port was to be an export-oriented industrial zone. Now, if you don't have an industrial policy, if you don't have a development bank, if you don't have vocational training institutes to train industrial workers, obviously the port is not going to work. That's not China's fault, that's our fault. There's a lot of cases like this throughout the BRI. Probably one of the reasons now that there's not much free money in BRI as there used to be. That phase of China going out is ended. I think the Hambantota port case, it's complicated, but the basic myth of the debt trap is a complete lie.
This is Rajesh Shrestha, former Additional Inspector General of Armed Police Force, and I also did have opportunity to work as Executive Director in the Institute of Foreign Affairs of Nepal, the only government think tank working under Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Thank you for your nice presentations, and as you have connected and why the MCC Compact approved $480 million project for Sri Lanka, but it was rejected by the government of Sri Lanka in 2020 December. And my question is, as you connected the geopolitics, security, defense, and many other aspects, and while considering the approved compact, MCC compact project for Sri Lanka. And my question is, given that the MCC compact's failure was heavily influenced by a political climate of nationalism and misinformation, what are the lasting impacts of this event on Sri Lanka's ability to engage with future foreign development projects and address its binding economic constraints? Thank you.
So a lot has happened since the MCC saga, and it's not necessarily, at the forefront of the public consciousness anymore. But what the MCC did is that it set a kind of precedent that there is a line publicly the policymakers cannot cross, because they know that there will be public outrage. In terms of how it affects Sri Lanka's development and how to deal with the current economic crisis, I'm not sure that it has a necessarily direct effect. In fact, it hasn't even stopped the US from engaging. So for example, around 2020, 2021, the US was approaching Sri Lanka to establish an LNG plant there. A big private US company, which was financed by BlackRock, wanted to do this. This was despite the fact that the MCC project didn't go. So I don't think it has had a negative impact from the perspective of attracting investment. There are always investment opportunities because there are always countries and businesses with surpluses, and they want to invest. So I wouldn't say it has had a negative effect on prospects for investment. And I don't think that should be, I don't think that concern should be weaponized to justify going into agreements like this.
Hello. Namaste, Mr. Siran. First of all, I would like to thank you so much for your highly professional presentations. My question is very short. Recently, the BlackRock has issued a policy of tokenization of assets equivalent to $10 trillion throughout the world. Do you think the deep state is running the string of MCC for Christianity and the BRI for communism? Thank you.
Interesting question. The short answer is I don't think so. With the MCC in particular, imperialism, you can call it the deep state or what have you, has many tools. There was imperialism before MCC, there'll be imperialism after MCC. There's lots of different avenues and instruments and levers that they have at their disposal. They have sanctions, they have embargoes, they have control over intellectual property rights and so on. I know we're here to talk about MCC. I don't want to distract from MCC, but I would say, the deep state has many options. As for BRI, I think BRI is generally positive for the Global South. I think it's good that around that time after the global financial crisis, 2008 you have the global financial crisis, and then you have the formation of BRICS a few years afterwards, right? And you have a new mood in the Global South. All these countries in the Global South are saying, the West is not reliable. The Western economic model is not reliable. Even from a business perspective, these markets are unstable. The way they're running the global financial architecture, the way they use it. I think the BRI was a very, very positive thing because, if you see historically what China has been doing is that they've been reducing their holdings of US treasuries, which means they're lending less money to the US and they're lending more money to us in the Global South, so that we can do something productive with it, because all the US does with the money that's lent to them is fund their war machine to destroy countries like ours. So, in that sense, BRI I think is a very, very positive thing, but we need to learn to use it wisely.
नेपाली भाषीहरूलाई माफी माग्न चाहन्छु स्पिकर चाहिँ अंग्रेजी भाषाको हुनाले आई लाइक टु स्पिक इन इंग्लिश Firstly, thank you so much because you clearly spelled out that how projects like MCC actually they implement neoliberal policy, but in the guise of saying, you know, like it will be creating jobs, there will be economic prosperity, there are so many infrastructure development that will be taking place, and in general public it tries to, you know, like give that kind of impression, and thank you for raising that. And in terms of lesson learned, I want to highlight again that how you said, you know, like the struggle or the resistance was focused on patriotism and humanitarian, due to which it kind of derailed. And I want to link it to our today's presentation, where not all but some speakers were trying to in a way narrowly portray it, and that was the mistake we do, because when we are talking about MCC today, and people of my generation and my later generation want to know why we did and where we failed, so that today it could be MCC, later NCC, or whatever name it could be, but this kind of project are implemented on country like ours. And when we fail to, you know, take the struggle and understand the situation, I think this is where we fail in terms of people at large. So bringing it back to our context, I just want to say that in Nepal, again revisiting, you know, like what we did during the MCC discourse and while signing itself, we focused more on, you know, like very patriotic kind of discourse, due to which we were just blaming some of the leaders, or maybe that times maybe ministers, saying that this minister was not patriotic enough that he signed it or she signed it or talked towards it. But we failed to discuss how capitalism functions, how imperialism functions, and due to this reason we were totally derailed and we failed at large, especially Communist Party itself. So I think when we are doing this kind of discourse, we need to reframe our discourse first, understanding how capitalism functions. And one important thing for a country like Sri Lanka and for Nepali, geopolitics. How geopolitics functions, that very nice minister or very nice leader who gives very nice speech in front of us fails in the negotiation table, because there are lots of factors like neoliberal policy implementation, capitalism, and imperialism. So I think the first thing, as when we are struggling against projects like MCC, we need to train on understanding how capitalism functions. Thank you.
Amazing. I totally agree with everything you said.
Very interesting during negotiation. The movement of MCC actually surfaced in Nepal, not because the political landscapes, geopolitics, and of a very primary issue in the beginning. Discussion regarding MCC surfaced when people studied the particular agreement. So before that, there was very less discussion about what MCC, because Nepal, we are in a very geopolitical situation, therefore it would be very important for the government or the political parties to balance between very close neighbors as well as the country which is very friendly but very firm. But my experience, particularly because I was one of the person who has been insane to discuss within the agreement. But what is very interesting is, like, on the one way is like Karuna says how capitalism works is not much familiar, but other way around. In a country like Nepal and maybe Sri Lanka, geopolitically very hot, political leaders, if they fail to look into the national interest, and they are much more concerned with dealing with their private concerns, then whatever you do, they do not understand. They understand, but they pretend to understand, but they do not follow. I think in Nepal, there is no debate within the political parties. There are no intellectuals who have not gone to political leaders. Hours and hours explanations regarding its perpetual succession issue, its employment issue, its distribution of the fund to different sectors. As you very rightly said, we raise very seriously like the data, why MCC needs all road networking in Nepal, like the airports and everything, the forest and everything. But political leaders fail to understand, or they understood, but they did not want to follow it. The reason is still not mapped very well. Were they very strongly pressurized from inside, or a very minor issue also there? Here, most of the political leaders, most of the bureaucratic leaders, and a certain percentage of elites that rule the country, actually they live here, but their property is in other countries. Their children are in other countries. So the diaspora, in fact, influences it. So merely debate regarding capitalism is not enough. The structural changes in the society towards it is going is also very important. So to be very clear, it's communist in Nepal or Sri Lanka is very important. I don't know what is in Sri Lanka, but it's a very relevant question in Nepal. It's communist or somebody else is very important. So it's 18 years, long period. 4 or 5 communist prime ministers ruled the country. And only 2 years more than communist, Nepali Congress ruled the country. So out of 37 years, almost it is 50%. But in those 18 years long period, communists happily married with neoliberalism. So my understanding is like having a wife who is always with you is forgot what is class struggle, what is class distinction, which class you belong to, and which class you are supposed to do, and what policy. Probably you have to work for the class that you represent. All they are gone. Therefore, Communist Party and leftist ideology in Nepal became a very good signboard, but substance is zero. So that's one of the reason I think we failed to convince communist leaders, and even in Congress, large number are socialists, but they failed to convince. They failed to be convinced. Actually, it was very terrible kind of thing. So MCC itself, not debated, but what is debated in Nepal very strongly was the provisions, privatization, and then all this kind of issue include were very important. So here, the movement was led by intellectuals, and the debate was very substantive. But this substantive debate, which needed to be reflected in the parliament, and then parliament was absolutely blocked. It was passed in a couple of hours without discussion. That's very fatal. So we would be sometime be happy to listen more from Sri Lanka. What was your situation? I think this issue didn't go to the parliament in Sri Lanka. So how was this debate among the intellectuals? And who actually lead the movement? It is intellectual who represented certain class who actually are the working class people. They looked this debate in favor of the working class people. It was an intellectual privilege, intellectual luxury kind of thing. So here at the last, it became an intellectual luxury more than intellectual supported the working class. So that was the situation. So we would be happy, not today, but sometime, you can have more information for us. Thank you.
Maybe I'll quickly say something. Just to abstract away from our region, you might have seen in the news in Bolivia, the left lost the election and the right has come back after a long time. And in Bolivia, the left actually had a great track record in terms of concrete outcomes. When Evo Morales came to power, his programs alleviated so much poverty. And most people say that they lost the election because they split, but that's not the only reason. The struggle doesn't end once the Communist Party comes into government. There's a new struggle when you're in government, because obviously, the communists never have the best intellectuals with them. They have a handful of good, dedicated ones, but the best lawyers, the best economists, they're all going to be the right-wing people. So you have the state machinery. You don't have control over the bureaucracy. You don't have the capacity, the so-called human capital, to come with you in these negotiations and explain how everything works. So you're trying to maneuver this state machinery. It's very hard. And it's very easy to get sucked up into that, right? And then you lose a connection with the masses. That's what happened in Bolivia, right? The masses weren't mobilized. They were sort of demobilized after. I don't know enough about Nepal to know whether this is the case or not, but I'm just offering it as an idea. I think what you and what the lady before you said is so important, because it's not just about having this discussion as intellectuals in this room here, but it's the discussions we have outside with the mass organizations. So these points we discussed today, how do you take it to the peasants? How do you take it to the workers in language that they understand, that addresses their immediate economic concerns? I think Sri Lanka didn't necessarily do that in a left-wing way, but I would say that there was a mass movement against it. That mass character was there. Probably the smartest intellectuals were pro-MCC. The intellectuals who were anti-MCC were, to be frank, some of them were quite crude. There was a lot of conspiracy theories, there was a lot of religious stuff and so on. But the masses moved in a certain way, and they were responding to their conditions. The failure of the government subsequent to that is because of their detachment from the masses. So this whole dialectic of communists being in power, having to do the technocratic, bureaucratic stuff because you have to do that, that's reality. But at the same time, maintaining the link with the masses, that is a serious challenge. And I think any left or communist or socialist who comes to power always has that challenge.
Thank you very much, Mr. Siran Ilan Peruma, for enlightening us with the Sri Lankan experience. Sri Lanka also had, I heard about particularly the corrupt practices in the government during Mahendra Rajapaksa's time. The present government was trying to unfold these things. I don't know how is the progress. When I was there in February, that was the discussion. Hopefully, they will, at least the present government, the left government, should remain clean and will remain clean. That's what we hope for the present president. It was kind of, the JBP had a kind of a standing like in Nepal, like Mr. Biplav here, and that kind of personality, Anura was there. But now Anura has become so much reformed. He is friend to all the Western countries also, and Mr. Modi, he was the first to talk to Mr. Modi and like that. He came from that kind of background, very radical left background. He is running the country, and he has said that his door is open in the presidential palace. It is symbolically open the door for all the people. Let's hope for the better of Sri Lanka. And as once again, as he had said, they are doing well, and they have also problem as with us. mismanagement, corrupt practices. So these things we have to fight in all developing countries, whether it is a left government or the rightist government. These things in the bureaucracy are still troubling all the people, and people are suffering because of these corrupt practices. So the government has to be clean. At least the leaders have to be very, very clean. And from my study, Mr. Anura Dissanayake is trying. Let us hope all the best for him, for his government. And our friends representing the journalism sector in Sri Lanka, so people, intellectuals like him, will always be there to do the critical analysis of what the government is doing and to make the frank criticism of the government so that the government make progress, and the criticism should not be suppressed. So this is one of the main characteristic for a government, whether it's leftist or non-leftist. At least there has to be minimum freedom for criticism. Then people can improve. That's what I think Mr. Ilan Peruma has been emphasizing on for the sake of the people of our respective countries, because we had such a long relationship in 20th century and in 21st century, and the time to come, our people will learn from each other and make progress. With that wish, I would like to conclude today's session. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
अब हाम्रो यो लास्ट सेसन थियो र म पहिला उहाँहरूलाई चाहिँ टोकन अफ लभ दिन चाहन्छु। त्यसपछि Thank you, friends. This has been a very wonderful discussions on the Kathmandu Dialogue Series 2. Very active participation, a lot of questions and answers. We had been very much enlightened about the MCC, very much that's what I feel. And we'll be meeting tomorrow at 8:30 in the same hall. So till that, I'll say goodbye to you and namaste. Thank you.